When you think of Neev, 20 years in, if there was a message that you want to start with of why you built Neev and the intention with which you have operated for the last 20 years.
In India, the amount of work that we have to put into the school buildings is so much and so hard.
You're dealing with the future generation, right? So I feel that the stakes are much higher.
In India, we've for so long forgotten that to be modern, you don't need to be Western.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've just forgotten. We don't use our mother tongues. We don't talk about many of our traditions. We don't wear traditional clothes. English has replaced many languages as a language of thinking.
What made you think that, I need to take it on my own hands and I will start a school?
It's who I am as a person. I had a mentor. He used to always say that to bring home the wood, she'll build the forest.
Did it feel like a risk at the time?
It felt like a risk because the educators I was looking at were not necessarily the educators that I was looking at preschools in India. I was looking at educators at places like UWC Singapore and wonderful Montessori schools that existed in the US and in the UK. I was looking at the forest schools movement, and I was saying that these people are so experienced and there's so much that they know that who's going to trust me?
What were the non-negotiable that you put into your designing the school, the curriculum, the timetables, the classrooms?
Child at the center. It's always child at the center.
Sometimes parents just understand the language of marks. They're not able to see those day-to-day changes or initiatives that the school may be focused on, which may have a compounding effect on life of chasing excellence or becoming self-directed learners and all of that. So how do you deal with that? Educating the parents also in that regards, and then for your own self-evaluation in terms of what are those attributes you consider as a success?
At Neev, we are always doing that. We are constantly picking up that number. If you look at just simply our IB scores, we started with a 30 point something average and our last cohort was 38.5 as an average, and that's huge. There are many metrics that we look at. So we start early with looking at a metric like reading, for example, and our reports for our children always has a bell curve of reading. And reading is an early indicator of how you're going to do with academics.
Hi, welcome to Inspired. I'm your host, Ankur Gupta. Before we begin, I want to place a thought on the table, not as a question, but as context. Most of us who build schools say we are shaping the future, but very few of us actually sit with the weight of that sentence. Because shaping the future doesn't happen through infrastructure or curriculum or even results. It happens quietly, through the choices we normalize, the trade-offs we justify, and the time horizons we operate in. Today's conversation is an invitation to slow down, to examine what it means to build an institution that is not trying to win a moment, but trying to remain relevant, ethical, and human across generations. My guest today has spent 2 decades resisting shortcuts, not boldly, not profoundly, but structurally, through governance, through culture, through restraint. This is not a conversation about best practices. It's a conversation about responsibility. I'm joined by Kavita Gupta Sabharwal, founder and managing trustee of Neev Academy, Bangalore. Kavita, welcome to Inspired. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction.
No problem. You've deserved it more than what I could express in words. And I'm very excited to have a conversation with you at Neev Academy. While just the presence of the energy around this area is in some ways refreshing and calm. So I'm very excited about today's conversation. Thank you for doing this with us at Inspired and hosting us here. Before we begin, I want to set some intention for today. right? A lot of our guests and largely the audience at Inspired are school leaders, head of schools, teachers, everyone who's looking to contribute in education. And they'll be in different sort of timeline of their journey in education, right? What I want to achieve today is not just inspiration for our audience, but more so clarity. The clarity with which you operate, and the clarity in which our audience can really take away the learnings and journeys from Kavita's journey of building Neev. So, with that context in mind, when you think of Neev, 20 years in, if there was a message that you want to start with of why you built Neev, and the intention with which you have operated for the last 20 years, how would you want the listeners to understand that?
So I don't know how much I don't know how much one school can necessarily learn from or be inspired. I suppose inspiration is possible, but learn from each other, that's really hard, because the context of every school, the community of every school is always so different, that and that's very relevant in education. I want to respond to a couple of things that you said in the opening, and you said that the need to slow down, right? And I think that has been a very conscious choice at Neev. Sometimes it feels like we're not moving as fast as many other organizations are, but I don't know if education can ever be fast forwarded. And one of the things that you said was the building of schools, and we always say that. The building of schools only starts once school buildings are done. But often in India, the amount of work that we have to put into the school buildings is so much and so hard. And when I'm saying school buildings, I'm not just talking about the physical structure of schools, but getting the real estate, getting licenses, getting all of that into place is just so hard. That by the time you're done, you feel like all your work is done and you just stop right there. But the building of schools only starts once that moment happens. And I think that's been the experience that we've had, that every time you set up a school or set up a campus, even one of our earliest campuses, it's at that point that the building of your school starts, right? Building routines is really hard. Building a community that believes in those routines and respects those routines is really hard. So it's really that. I think it's for us, and I don't think that can be fast forwarded. I think it's just one of the things that always surprises me is the number of organizations that India has that do multiple school campuses and franchising of schools. That actually does not happen anywhere else in the world at quality, and that's a challenge. I do understand why we need it, because I think the growth and the requirement of schools is so far exceeding the kind of supply that we have of quality schools. So I do see why that's happening, but it's hard. Yeah. Fast forwarding school building, setting up more campuses, there is just no way to do that. Schools are about the slow. Schools are about culture building. And we always say culture building is something that takes 30 years.
Yeah.
How do you possibly fast forward that? We look at organizations in the UK, the US, great schools have been there for 80 years, 100 years. Great universities, the youngest great university will be 125 years. So how do you build culture any faster than that? And how do you build an institution that is able to then create that learning experience for every learner in there? It's just hard. I don't think schools can be fast forwarded.
I think you made a very interesting thing about culture, right? I mean, everything nowadays, there's a lot of attention around culture building, whether it is businesses or obviously in the context of our conversation, schools and universities. And And culture,
In
I don't
corporate
think.
life, you always heard that that culture eats strategy for
Yes,
breakfast.
yes. So that's a very popular
So it
saying.
is, but in schools even more so, because
Absolutely.
schools are
And you're
such human
dealing with the future
places.
generation, right? So I feel that the
And they're
stakes
such
are much
human
higher.
places because they're teachers. Everything is an interaction, everything is a relationship,
Yeah.
right? So everything you say and don't say, do and don't do, has implications in a school.
But when you think of culture at a school, right, I feel that it's not something that you feel your culture is now set. I feel it's
No.
it's something that is to be built every day,
Yeah.
and even if it is 20, 30 years down the line, it will continue to
Yeah.
sort of shape itself depending on the stewards who are
It never
responsible at the
gets
time. It
done.
never
It
gets
never
done.
gets done. And I think being in education is really that reminder that that nothing ever gets finished.
Exactly.
So it's always, if you have to hold a finished product in your hand and say this is what the school is, I don't think that'll ever happen,
But 20
because it's
years.
always work in process, because we are always responding to what's happening in the environment, right? So you're constantly doing that. A lot of what you're doing is going back to very old practices rather than very new practices, but it is still always a work in process because you're always responding to what's happening. I mean, pandemic was a life defining moment. AI is another life defining
Yeah.
moment, so you're constantly responding, and more so in the lifetime of a school like Neev.
Yeah.
Because the 20 years, I don't know if you've read The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt, and he speaks about this as that this 20-year period, the 2005 to 2025, has been the growth of the anxious generation.
Interesting.
And that is the life of Neev.
Yeah.
Because we started in 2005 and this is 2025. So our growth as an organization has been parallel with the growth of the anxious generation.
Yeah.
This is what we have seen as education. So given that, in this time, the amount of response that we've had to have to everything from devices to the Internet of Things to the OTT to the pandemic to AI to all of that has just been so huge that globalization. So the world has changed in these 20 years, and
Yeah.
we've just constantly been responding and working with that all the time. We certainly feel that, it feels, this year for the first year feels like we are in a moment of calm for some reason. Last year did not feel like that.
Interesting.
We have stopped
And
blaming
what
the
has
pandemic.
caused that calmness feeling for you?
I don't know actually. I think I think the kids have calmed down post pandemic.
Okay.
I think the generations that grew up in we always talk about the tweens as the generation that was hit worst by the pandemic.
And which
Premature,
age group was that, according to you?
the tweens.
Okay.
So you're looking at the kids who are not teens and not yet the not high schoolers
Yeah.
yet. So it's the kids who are caught in the middle. It's the 12s and the 13s and 14s, and so it's those are the kids that were hit worst, because the theory of self is very forming at that time, and their theory of self was forming behind a Zoom screen. So I think those kids were. There's someone who coined the term premature adultification, and they experienced that. I think that was the hardest. So maybe it's that generation growing out. Maybe the next generation was just so small, their theory of self wasn't yet there.
Okay.
So they have grown up in a normal world. Maybe it's that. Maybe the whole world has decided that we can't blame things on the pandemic anymore. But for sure, things are way calmer. Maybe schools have adapted to say what is required for motivation in this new generation. I think to some extent it's also AI,
Interesting.
and that is the benefit of AI.
Okay.
I have to acknowledge that it stopped doom scrolling.
But I'll get to
Sure.
some of this
Sure.
later in our conversation.
Yeah.
What you said the tweens, I personally resonate. My daughter, who she just turned 10, and so she would have been 5. That early childhood. She had her pre-KGs on Zoom and all of that.
So she's not impacted.
You think she's not impacted,
She's
but
not impacted.
I was counterintuitive about that and that's what I was trying to understand this better, because I
when
thought like
something
she
is-
didn't get to experience the early classrooms, and do you think
It
that
doesn't
would have
matter.
impacted anything
doesn't
for
matter.
that age group?
It doesn't matter. If your child was under the age of 7, 8, life is okay. So early childhood
Because
is
still
that
too
period.
formative time for them to really carry the baggage of it, is it?
So first of all, so two things, right? So one is the fact that something that's happening to everyone else is not a problem, right? The second thing is that their context in early childhood is essentially the family, the community right around them, grandparents, siblings, things like that. So that becomes their community. And if that's the norm for everyone around them, that's the norm. So they're okay.
And actually, you got more family time, and that's probably very important for that age group, so to speak. So
I mean, making them more independent might be a requirement, but I think that the world has now taught them that, the moment they went back to school and they had to adapt to a normal school routine.
But it's
and
very
be more
good to hear
independent,
that, finally, we've, as an educator, if I'm listening from you, that people are getting ready to move on from pandemic, because everything seemed to be blaming,
It was our kids in 2022, 2 years after the pandemic, is when India returned to some sort of normalcy, and others returned even a little bit later. The younger children. But in 2022, when our kids in grade 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12 also came back, 10, 11, 12 was okay because they were taken over by the board exams. Right? So there was a very real target right there in front of them. It was the 8, 9, 7, those were the kids that were hit worst by all of this. 6, they were the kids that were hit worst by it, because they came back to school looking like, it was a cookie cutter moment where everybody looked the same. Suddenly, everybody was wearing, and we didn't insist on uniforms that first year, end of that year when we were coming back, because it seemed like a silly spend to have for those few months. So all the kids that came back to school were looking the same. Their hair was looking the same, their clothes were looking the same. So the impact of social media and digital and OTT, which became huge in that time, was so significant on them. They did not see themselves as different from everything that they were seeing online. They had the same anxiety, mental well-being issues, all of that they were seeing online. And often I would ask kids that, what makes you say that you have depression, say, right? So
you got to learn these things in that
because
time.
I'm looking at all patterns of behavior that you have, and it doesn't qualify. But it's to them, their experience was, I have seen this online and I have seen others that suffer from this, and that's got a label. So what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing right now also has a label. So it was that, right? So anything that they were seeing on screen was happening to them. It was whether or not it was actually happening to them. So I think that was their identity. And it was a reminder to us that when we don't consciously build strong identities, that's the challenge. And, in India, we've for so long forgotten that to be modern, you don't need to be Western. And that's something that we've just forgotten. That many of our children gave into that identity very quickly. We don't use our mother tongues. We don't talk about many of our traditions. We don't wear traditional clothes. English has replaced many languages as a language of thinking, right? So I think given that the books that our kids read are all Western children's literature. So given that is the context of childhood. Our grandparents are learning how to speak to them in English, are learning how to tell the Western stories to them, because they think that's what's required, They're not telling us the stories that we grew up with. So I think it's that. So it was a moment of pause for us to recognize that unless you're building a strong sense of identity and nurturing that, you lose the game. The moment something like this happens that takes your child away from you and makes your child see some sort of a Western or some global construct, that becomes their identity, and that's who they become then.
So I think this identity thing is a constant challenge, especially in India, where call it a little bit of a colonial hangover. Western is better than a homegrown, and sometimes
which we've forgotten, right? Because we thought to be modern means to be Western, and that's hard.
And it's amazing. Some of our ancient wisdom is getting repackaged and wrapped around and sold back to us, and all suddenly we become excited about, yoga
Yeah.
is the cool thing to do. Makhana is the healthy food to eat because someone packaged it in the US in a very good
Not
way.
just that, there's so much else in
Yeah,
there,
I'm just
right?
giving examples,
So
yeah.
we have my mother also learned how to speak in English. With five of us, she learned how to speak in English because she thought that was the right thing to do. And there's so much that's lost. And a friend was recently telling me, I think many of these things have given a lot of India the confidence to go back to what is identity. At Neev, we've always valued that a lot. So, but we recognize how much more we need to put that very forcefully into the structure, and we need to bring that to the fore, and almost legitimize identity to come out and be shared, so that the kids are confident in living that as well. So we see this. A friend was saying that how and so she's gone back to Hindi and a lot of work there, and she was talking of how the whole thing with the language that is built for efficiency replaces emotional accuracy, actually, right? So if you look at that, right, so English for communication efficiency versus emotional accuracy that for her comes from Hindi.
Which
I
is your
relate to
natural
that.
mother tongue, basically.
I relate to that because my heart sings when I'm listening to Gujarati, Marathi, Hindi. It's the languages that I grew up with. And it sings when I'm speaking muhavre in Hindi, or if I'm thinking Bharatnatyam, because I used to be a Bharatnatyam dancer, so I always think in mudras. So when I'm thinking of mythological stories, I'm always thinking in mudras. So it's again, and that's part of identity. It's deeply embedded. Are we doing that for our children consciously? Our kids are learning how to play the piano and the guitar. They are not learning how to.
Sitar, or
They're not learning Indian instruments. They
Yeah.
can't differentiate between a sitar and a veena
Yeah.
very often, and I think and I'm like, count the number of wires and then So things like that. So we recognize that it's not enough to just do cultural days, but to embed all of this deeper into identity. So that the kids take that with them as they go. So we don't talk about identity; we talk about sustained identity now. So it's not just a matter of doing an event and that becomes identity, but the sustained identity that you're forming from the choices that you're making every day. That is what
It has to
is bringing.
reinforce on an everyday basis, basically, through the
It has to be
choices
there
you make.
all the time.
Yeah.
My grandfather used to have, and that's what grandparents. I mean, you think of the number of constructs that existed in our world that have changed, right? So if I think of my own childhood, my learning was significantly around the dining table, right? My learning was also significantly on vacations. My learning was also from grandparents, and what one set of grandparents did and another set of grandparents did was completely different, right? Today, all those constructs have changed in the lives of our children. Grandparents come for a small visit. We were sent away to Delhi for 2 months
Yeah.
to
The
live
entire
with one
summer
set of
break was at,
grandparents. And
the Nani Nana house.
yeah, and Dadi and Dada used to be
Yeah.
there with us for many months
Yeah.
at a time. So the kind of stories that you heard and the kind of experiences that you heard, those are not in our children's lives anymore. And I think it's how do you build that in? And I think that's the challenge. And it's not hard, but just to people also feel that they need to learn how to parent. They don't trust instincts in parenting. So recognizing that you can have the confidence to bring your children up the way you were brought up, and you won't go very wrong with that. You don't need to give your child a million choices in everything.
Yeah.
Recognize where you want to give choices and where you don't want to give choices. You don't need to give a choice in which water bottle you're going to carry or which jacket you're going to wear today. That's not required.
That's a whole different.
How do you take some of that away? But build choice where it matters, in the projects that you're doing, in the choices that you're making of how you spend your time, things like that. I think it's also be careful with how you're spending your time on the internet. There's so much of conscious choice that, so I think parents trusting their instincts on parenting and not needing to. We always say that, we do this Lit Fest, and people often ask us, oh, do you have parenting conversations there? We actually don't put in parenting conferences there because I think, every model of parenting from a parenting expert is just so different in there that we always tell people that go to learn about parenting from people who are not doing a parenting conversation. Listen to many such conversations and and form your own formula of parenting yourself by trusting your instincts in the middle of it all, by recognizing parenting doesn't come with a handbook.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think it's
So
that gut instinct, and we just feel that something's going to get left behind if you don't listen to this theory or that theory and then start giving more options. I mean, how often were we as kids, and you've grown up in a very different time from what I grew up, but I was never asked, how are you feeling?
same here.
Were you?
We're not too far. I
The
don't think my
number of
parents ever
times
asked me.
we ask our
Yeah,
kids,
yes.
not we, as in, people ask their kids often,
Yeah.
how are you feeling? I think the only time that happened was if I had a fever
Exactly.
and somebody reached out to touch your forehead to see if you still had a fever, and they still didn't ask you how you're feeling. I mean, if you could have thrown up on the ground completely and you would still not get asked, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
So it might be a good idea to ask a little bit of how you're feeling if you're really sick. But I think the number of times our kids get asked today how you're feeling, and by so many people, stop asking them that. If they're not doing okay, create the room for them to talk to you about it, but don't constantly make them feel that they need to not feel okay somewhere.
It's okay to not feel okay is what is needed. That is a human
and
emotion.
when they don't feel okay, they'll tell you, but
and for
don't
them to
constantly keep
express
asking
it.
them. But
Yeah.
don't constantly keep asking them, how are you feeling? Because they're also looking at movies, and then they feel the need to tell you how they're feeling. And most of the time it's I'm feeling fine.
Yeah.
But they don't feel confident saying that, because they're hearing so much about how someone else is not feeling okay on many movies they watch and series they watch, that they feel the need to share exactly how they're feeling. They've not slept well. They've not, I think it's okay. You've not slept well. Nap a little bit more. That's about it.
The whole thing about how
Take it
you're
into your
feeling. Like,
stride.
I feel like in our
Too
parents,
many choices.
Yeah, in our parents' time, your parents are not asking how you're feeling, but you still felt very secured around
Yeah.
their support and that they being there. And I feel in today's terms,
Because
people
no
would
one was
say,
distracted.
how are you feeling? Even things like I love you is said to your kids.
You now have
in
AI
almost
tools.
like a superficial way.
You have AI tools now on how to have a conversation on
With
a
your
dining
child,
table.
yeah.
And you have AI tools on how you can analyze how you're feeling by everybody on that dining table feeding responses
Yeah.
into that same AI tool to get a measure of how we are doing today and get a score at the end of it. And I think it's none of that existed.
Yeah.
So everyone was with each other.
Yeah.
I think the start of distancing with everything that was coming, I think that's what it is. We always say we go on these learning journeys as a school, and we go across the whole country. We travel all over the place. We see for some time kids, especially high school kids, because they all have cell phones now, right? So whenever a moment of discomfort happens, when there's conversation not happening, you see a hand creeping, and it's reaching out, and then they realize the device is not there.
Yeah.
Because on our learning journeys, we don't have devices.
don't have
and the
allowed
hand
them.
comes back,
Yeah.
So we see that. And then a couple of days into it, it stops. Because they now have the confidence to deal with each other, and they're okay with the silences as well. So I think that discomfort with silences, discomfort with boredom, which leads to creativity finally, which leads to relationships, having an AI therapist constantly ready, or a bot ready to talk to you at all given times, which a friend might not talk to you at.
Yeah.
So, I think dealing with some of those things has just become hard now. And I think it's that's creating that need to constantly express how you're not feeling okay, or constantly evaluate how you're feeling. Most of the times you should be okay with how you're feeling. Stop getting asked that.
Let me pause for a second and rewind a bit, because I know I want to cover a lot of this, what you're talking about, for our audience. But I think a lot of the values, the culture, all of these things we're talking about, we've briefly brushed upon, they're rooted in a certain North Star for all founders, which is their why. Right? You're rooted in why you build a school like this, why you're doing what you're doing, even what you're about to do. It all sort of ties down to your purpose of why you did it. So please share that with us a little bit so that we get better context for our audience.
Sure. So my son was, when we started preschool, it was just a matter of need. Coming back to India and saying that that you can't get admission into the school that you want your child in,
Oh,
and
is
the
it?
school that your child can get admission into, you don't want that school for your child. So that's where, just from that place of need is where Neev started. But it also started from another place. We had a child late, and we were looking at how to bring in. I used to be a dancer at that point, and I don't think you ever stopped being that.
Yeah.
But it's he. We had a lot of Indian stories and language. He was a Hindi speaking baby,
Oh,
and
nice.
it was there was a lot of all of that in his life, and suddenly that started going away. Right, so we suddenly got to this place where we better speak with him in English, otherwise he's not going to get admission. So many of those things, and I
He
think
was born here or born?
he was born in India. Then we
Okay.
lived in Singapore for a couple of years,
Okay.
and then we came back here.
That's
and
when
so
you
we
were
started.
starting to look for schools.
We started looking for. He used to speak very Shuddh Hindi, so it was
Acha,
always,
nice.
mujhe
Was that a
thepla.
conscious choice?
It was a conscious choice to speak in Hindi.
Why?
All the time? It was what we grew up with. A little bit of that with grandparents around, and we recognized that grandparents weren't around, so we just spoke in Hindi a lot. It was not actually a conscious choice. Actually, I take that back. It was
Yeah.
just something. It was just.
It was just
something-
natural. It came naturally to you.
Yeah,
at
I
home.
think I just look for the Indian stories all the time, and that was deeply embedded. I look for Indian music all the time, and that was also deeply embedded. So looking for stories and music that was Indian is where I think the Hindi happened. I was looking at a lot of Western children's books as well, and I recognized there weren't enough Indian stories around. So we were constantly creating those.
So, what were some of
around.
the books that you exposed your children early on?
There weren't any
Or
Indian
stories
story books. There weren't any Indian story books around. There was a decent amount of Indian music around. There was that movie Makdi that had just come out at that point of time, with Shabana Azmi.
Yeah.
So it was all those horror songs of and very, very, very spooky songs. So those were the Hindi songs. And then the Preeti Sagar videos came, audios, the series came out with Diwali Aayi, Khushiyon Ka Tyohar Lai, and things like that. So at that time, you didn't have any of that in books. Looking deep and hard, I found one Indian book, Chacha Ji's Cup, which was about a partition story written by an Indian writer based in Canada about Chacha Ji's cup, which gets carried from Pakistan all the way to Canada, and then it breaks. And, I think, so these few stories that were in there made me recognize that we need many more Indian stories in there in children's lives. So we brought those alive the way we could through telling stories, not through reading them. But Asan also had a lot of Western literature, Western storybooks, children's books that he grew up with. So we were always balancing the Hindi and the
Because I was just
Western
curious because, given
in
your
his life.
exposure, studying overseas, spend time overseas,
Yeah.
it just happens, then it becomes
That's what
part
you
of
do.
you as well, right?
I think Indian. I think being a dancer was a big part of that for me.
Yeah.
I thought in stories. I thought in mythology always. So while it never. I was also academically I was inclined towards a lot of academic work and scholarship, and I studied biotechnology.
Yeah.
So that was that whole other side. And we did internships before they became fashionable like they are today. We were out doing internships all the way from 9th grade, every break.
Wow, at that time.
We were sent everywhere to work in labs, to work in all kinds of places, whatever line you were functioning in. There was no concept of wasting time. So it was that. So, but the dance was a very big part of my life. So listening to the stories and researching them. So I think that was probably part of that whole bit. And that didn't ever leave me. So that Dasha Avatar and all of that, Ramayan. So
okay.
all of
The
that
mythological
came to me.
blend.
It came to me through dance. And I think that is what remained firmly embedded. My parents were very much into Gita classes and all of that as well.
wow.
So there was that too. That was balancing. We were usually fighting that. But, dance brought that side together for me. And they were always switching. And sometimes it was Gita class, and sometimes it was ISKCON, and Krishna stories were happening and things like that. So it was all of that. But it's sometimes it was a Ramakrishna movement. And it was so based on any preacher that they could get that was really good, they were constantly bringing that and yoga and things like that into our lives. So that was always there. And I think that dance just brought that, it consolidated that place for Indian stories in my life. And I think that stayed.
So you moved here and you were trying to find the school for your son that
For my son.
Yes.
And so we started the preschools, and Indian festivals were always in balance with global festivals in everything that we did. We did a lot of events in the preschools, and then he went on to another school. And suddenly I saw him studying the Vikings, and there was all of that, and there was very little Indian. And I was wondering, why is he studying the Vikings, and why is he not studying?
This is after
possibly
you
the
started the
Mughals or
preschool. He
the
went to another
preschools.
preschool.
He went to another school after that.
After your preschool,
After
because
he
you were
finished
only early years at the
kindergarten,
time.
he went on to.
Yeah.
He wasn't with the preschools for long. He was only with us for 2 years
Okay.
because he was already that age,
That age
when we
had
came to
crossed,
India.
yeah.
So he went to this other school, and when we were looking at, and suddenly there was this whole Vikings one year and something else another year, and it was always that. So that's what made me want to extend what we were doing for a few more years. That was a thought process, and wrap curriculum around context, because as an IB school, we always say context builds concepts. Right. And now post-pandemic, we realize it not only builds concepts, but it also builds a motivation for learning. If you remove context, then what are you learning? It's just these abstract things. Kids think stories happen with some Western world for people with blue eyes and blonde hair, right? Kids think that I think many of these events and adventures happen in another context. So how do you bring that back here to remind them that, wait, that's happening every day in your life, right? So context is a very important part of learning. And how do you constantly build that? At Neev, we do that a lot. Our entire continuum of learning is deeply embedded in what the context is, and not just stories, but also challenges and problems in the environment that exist. So that's very much part of, we create the room for all of that. For example, we have a unit on role models, which is not about the intuitive thought process would be that you have something to learn from role models. But that's not what it's about. It's about identifying values and beliefs. And the unit is really about our values and beliefs allow us to choose role models that reflect those values and beliefs and consolidate those for us, right? Yeah, you should be questioning your values and beliefs, but you will choose your role models based on that. And those are the role models that you're going to live by. Our children, when they do that and they then start looking at role models around them, they're able to see role models are not just very far away figures in their lives, and not also just Gandhi and Nehru and all of that, but role models exist all around them, including in their family. So I think it's, the context of learning is just so important. You don't think that knowledge is something that exists in books and then exists in some other world. You recognize that knowledge is all around you, and that's what motivates learning at the end. So that's a lot of learning at Neev is about that. I think it's so when you spoke about why education and why, I think it's when I was looking at my son, who was very young, and I would have put him into childcare and then go on to work, and that's what I did in the beginning. I would drive him we lived in Bombay, and we lived on Nepean Road, and my mother's house was in Juhu, and I used to cart him all the way, drop him to my mother's house, then go to work, and around 7 o'clock I would leave from there and go and pick him up and basically take him back home and deposit him in bed, and that was about it. And the next morning, the whole thing started again, And I think it's, I could have sent him into childcare. The recognition that children are a piece of you that you send into the future. And therefore, what do you want to put into your child? And is that childcare really doing that? That recognition is what drove home the need to start the preschool as a long day preschool as well. So it was, that is what brought me into education when we were looking at schools. And I recognized that, just sending my child to a place where he spends many hours a day and does not get the input that he should get the stories, the culture, the routines, many of those that he did not get. Art. He would just learn how to do standing lines and sleeping lines and keep repeating that because that's what happens. I think we have not built for early childhood education in India. Even today, we have not built knowledge and skills. We're not into doing it scientifically. And there is a lot of science that's available. The NEP builds for that today. So the NEP, as it's just founded, it's so beautiful the way it's founded, foundational literacy and numeracy, the way they put that out. But that's a very hard shift for us to make as a country because that kind of science we're not used to at all. We're not training our teachers with that. How do you bring that kind of practice when we're not training our teachers for that? And
And
I
to
think
build that kind of scale in a country like
is
ours
what-
was going to take a lot of time.
it's going to take a lot of time. I think it's also teachers today for early childhood education and for primary education for that matter, there's this huge, we talk about the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, but teachers don't really get much training for that. They're not for reading, not for writing, not even for arithmetic. Most teachers that come from nursery teachers training, early childhood, Montessori training, things like that, they are trained in some specific programs like the Montessori, for example, or they are trained in doing art and craft portfolios very often. Our B.Ed also is very firmly embedded in sociology, psychology, but not pedagogy necessarily. So I think there's that whole bit that's left out. And that's really hard to make that shift because we don't have the trainers for it at all in the country. So unless we make that shift to bring the science of education into early childhood education, it's very, very hard.
So what made you that, again, I go back to this sort of question that keeps coming back to me is, here I am, I'm not happy with what I'm finding as a solution for my child. What made you think that, I need to take it on my own hands and I will start a school?
It's who I am as a person. I had a mentor back in the company, and he was not in the company, he was outside of the company, and he was so he used to always say that to bring home the wood, she'll build the forest, so that's always been, I suppose, been my attitude, and I never understood it way back then. So he used to always say this, and that's basically, it was that wish for having a world. My husband and I had both chosen to live in India. And that was a conscious choice. It was a very identity choice for us. We wanted to be part of the changing India always. We did not want to live elsewhere. And we made that choice. Both of us did study abroad and then decided that, this is where we are coming back. This was the place we wanted our children to grow up as well. But we could not have the kind of schools that we had seen in Singapore and America. We could not have preschools like that, and there was a moment of so much of school envy that used to constantly happen. So the thought that I had was to build that kind of practice, but to build it in an Indian context, solving my own problems really is what got me to starting the preschools.
Did it feel like a risk at the time?
It felt like a risk because the educators I was looking at were not necessarily the educators that I was looking at preschools in India. I was looking at educators at places like UWC Singapore and, wonderful Montessori schools that existed in the US and in the UK. I was looking at, the forest schools movement. And I was saying that these people are so experienced and there's so much that they know that who's going to trust me in education? Yeah. And that was really scary for me. So I lost a lot of sleep with that, saying that, I can't be trusted in education. And in fact, I probably have a bit of that imposter syndrome even today.
Is it?
In there that, do I really know enough about education? So I think it's, but that's in this context, I know a lot about education, and I've taught myself a lot about education over the years. So a lot of the early part of work that we did was importing technology and importing knowledge, transfer of technology, which is what I learned in a corporate environment, and brought a lot of that in, brought scientific ways of teaching language, teaching math, things like that. at that point, the resources weren't available as well in India for many practices, even for children to have loose parts, construction, things like that was not there. So much of that ended up getting imported either through trainers or through materials that we were importing. But today, it's early childhood education is in a better place in terms of resources, but still not in terms of pedagogy.
Got it. And your child was in, you guys were living in Mumbai at the time. What made you start the school
I was in
Bangalore?
Mumbai before. I was in Mumbai before we moved to Singapore.
Oh, okay.
For 2 years, and
Then you moved to Bangalore.
and then we chose to move to Bangalore because
Okay.
it seemed like a better place to bring up a child.
Nice.
Bombay, Delhi, and Bangalore were options. So we looked at Bangalore because it seemed like a nice place. The pace seemed slower.
Uh-huh.
And talk about that today. But it just, it felt like kids could still play on the streets at that point.
Yeah.
And they still can, at least in buildings.
Yeah.
Which is better than Bombay and Delhi. But I think it's, so that's what made us choose Bangalore. But there wasn't any school that, even today, I think when we look at our early childhood practice at Neev, if we look at our full school practice, we can look at who are competitors. But if you look at early childhood practice, that is Neev's starting point, it's a vast desert behind that. No one is anywhere close to what we are doing in the scientific work that goes into pedagogy and into the program that we develop for literacy, for numeracy.
Especially for early years, you're saying?
Especially for early years. And the confidence that we have now with that is just so huge.
But let's talk about when you were starting out, that confidence. I mean, obviously, over 20 years, it's built like a robust mechanism.
Yeah.
But what were some of those conversations with early parents, like, trying to bring their child to a school, understanding the vision of the school at the time, which was still forming?
Yeah.
What were some of those
So
conversations
Bangalore was
like?
not hard
Okay.
at all, because Bangalore, even at that point of time, in fact, Bangalore had a lot of expats at that time,
okay.
right? So
they were your early adopters.
They were our early adopters, and even not just expats, but also Indians that had moved back from other parts of the world. Even today, that remains the mainstay of Lupin's parent community, of Neev's. Sorry, that
all right.
remains the mainstay of Neev's community, because they are people who've traveled around the world and they have made that conscious choice to come back either for identity, family, many of those reasons, language. Something brings them back. Mangoes bring them back. I don't know. So I think it's even today, that's our community at Neev. But at that point of time, a lot of expats were a huge part of joining us. We had people who came and screamed and shouted at us that, we were very inexpensive compared with what we are today. But even at that point, I remember a parent walking in and we were starting our first preschool up, and he screamed and shouted from the gate, and he said that, how can you start something which is so expensive? And it was
What was
10,000.
that at that
It was 10,000 rupees a month at that point, and I think he said, how can you have something which is so expensive? What right do you have to make so much money? So I remember that conversation, and I think recognizing that education costs. I mean, I went to a school which costs 300 rupees a month. So it's, I do understand where that's...
But the times have changed.
We're not used to paying for education. Yes. And I think that's one of the challenges, because that's what existed then. And today it's a little bit different, but not very different. So we had a lot of that what gives you the right to charge that kind of money in education. But we were a completely different model. We were a long day preschool, which people always looked at as childcare, but we were not childcare. We were a long day preschool because it takes that much of time with uptime and downtime to actually work with children.
So a lot of working professionals were part of your parent community because they wanted to have the children taken care of during the day?
A lot of our community even today is working professionals, not because of childcare, because India and childcare in India is a very different model, particularly at an elite level. So the kind of affordability that most parents have today, not even at our socio-economic strata that we serve, but also many levels different from that, right? Or below that, if you want to call it that, because I think that kind of care is available easily in India. So it's not as if they did not choose us because of the long day. but they chose us because of the kind of education they had seen elsewhere in the world, and the
they found
impact.
some similarity or resonated with that a little bit.
That's what resonated with them. We used to often hear from our preschool parents at that time that they were all living in other parts of the world. So they would all say that when my child graduates from Neev preschool is when I'll move back. So they would always say that. And I think that's something that we heard. It was one of the things that went into starting Neev Academy, to say, hey, we need to extend that a little bit. We don't need to have parents saying that. I mean, I think today parents have a lot of other options as well. But I think at that point, that's what it was. So a lot of our early adopters were people who had lived in other parts of the world. And we had marriages that were, one expat and one Indian, and they were choosing to live in India. So they recognized the impact of that scientific development for children, and they sought that for the children. They were very supportive parents.
Yeah, of course.
All
Now,
along.
I mean, given your background in terms of, you came from like corporate strategy work and that exposure, having the education you had, how did that play into an advantage for you as you were starting your school?
It probably played. So the place, we first did a survey on when we first started Neev. I wanted to understand the gaps that exist, and we ran a survey with about 100 people to say, what do you want changing in preschool education for children? The kind of responses that we got from that were so dismal. People wanted to see that children don't sit and eat. They sit and eat food in clean places. They have clean bathrooms. They have a table and a chair,
Very
things like that.
basic.
So it was so basic that I stopped doing all those surveys for many years after that.
Yeah.
Because
Your aspiration at the time was already much beyond that one, what the survey was
it
telling
was
you.
so beyond that, because I'd seen what education for early childhood needs to be, and the different models that could exist for that. And I wasn't looking at those models at that point from the perspective of wanting to even start a preschool. Because it was not part of my brain space at all to get into education. I was in finance and doing just fine. So we had, I had looked at many models because I was trying to make a choice, me being the problem solver. I was trying to make that choice of what kind of a model do I want to choose for my son. And everything that I went to did not tell me the context of what other models were. So just to understand all the various education models is how I started looking, researching, discovering many organizations, understanding what childcare even is about, but also learning the different educational models. And that's what went into the thought process of Neev. I think more of an operational background, managing operations and all of that is probably, setting up things better, process orientation, safety protocols, things like that, checklists for things like
Which
cleaning
was probably unheard of at the time, right?
checklists for cleaning bathrooms and things like that. So literally, at that very basic level is where more of that process orientation of a mindset went into an operational mindset, but not as much that strategic input. And, and honestly, I'd not envisaged even at that point of time that I would be in education for my life. At that point, I had thought that I will start up a preschool for my child, and then maybe I'll do one or two more, and then I'll get back to real work, is what I thought. But here I am 20 years later, and very happy in education. I probably apply much more of that strategic thinking today in education when we are looking at larger campuses, when we are looking at setting up of corporate governance and, a board that thinks about sustainable culture. So it's going much more into...
But what were the non-negotiable that you put into your designing the school, the curriculum, the timetables, the classrooms
Child
at
at the center. It's always child at the center is the thing that went into understanding. So a lot of practices are so intuitively, set up as existing models that we just take for granted. Like the thing that happens in preschools very often, which is standing lines, sleeping lines, and the kids just keep doing that repeatedly until they learn that school is about training ourselves to do the same repetitive task again and again and again. You're beating a child into submission by doing
You're
that,
boxing
right?
them in some ways,
You're not just boxing them, you're actually just telling them that the task that you're given and you're told to repeat and again and again and again is what education is about,
Yeah.
which is the opposite of what education needs to be, particularly at an elite level. I think it's so those models are so easily accepted that, and even today they are rampant. So I think because that's easier to do as well. So I think bringing a completely different practice in with that was to me was very very sensible and very logical, because I'd seen it in so many parts of the world. But bringing it in here and training for it, not as easy.
But if you were to do, say, 2026,
We used to get all these. We used to get all these teachers from all these chain preschools, and they would think that they would say that, I'm here, I'm going to teach you how to do this, and I would want to tell them that, we've got this.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then they would leave us because they did not want to be in a place where they couldn't teach us how to
Yeah,
set
and
up
I
the
mean,
preschool.
recruiting teachers is a big part of when you're building something like this.
It's
So we'll get that.
huge.
We'll get to that in a minute. I'm curious that if you were to build Neev Preschool today in 2026, what would be something drastically different that you would do from what you did in 2005?
I don't think you can. I don't think that I can even answer that question, because I think when you take the context away and you say that you change a whole bunch of stuff, the solutions change as well, right? So I think I think the context of where we are today in India is so different. The context of who we are today is so different that I don't think I can even answer
How would
that
you do it
question of how
differently?
would
Is there a way to think like that?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I think schools are not about pre-thought structures. They're just not about that. You feel your way. You cross the river by feeling the stones, is what someone said once.
Yeah.
Not an educator.
Yeah.
And that's what you do in education, because the context of India is so different. The context of India today is so different from 20 years back, right? The context post-pandemic is unthinkable. So I think I think every context is so different.
Yeah.
That what you set up, you cross the river by feeling the stones. You feel your way through it and you build practices around it. There are some given things on timetabling and things like that you could probably learn to do better and faster. But the rest of it, you have to feel your way through education. You evolve mission statements. You don't come raging in to say, this is my mission statement and I'm going to drive education with that. Mission statements are lived cultures before they go up on walls. So I think you don't do it any differently. I think, and that's why if you look at the greatest schools anywhere in the world, they have existed for decades before they start talking about their mission statement.
Yeah.
It's not a prepackaged thing that comes out of.
Otherwise, it's just letters on the
box.
wall, and if they don't find meaning
Yeah.
on what's written on the wall, then school loses its.
Yeah, and I came from that corporate background, right? So the first thing I did was this big, hairy, audacious goal kind of mission statement that I had, which had all kinds of best practices and international benchmarking mentioned in there. It was so long that I couldn't remember it most of the time, and our vision and mission statement today is so clean and simple because it's a lived one. Today, our kids know it, and it comes from what we do every day in school.
So you're able to do that with 20 years of experience. If we are speaking to a 30-some-year-old who's wanting to take this journey of being an educator, starting a school, what would you recommend for them to find their grounds, how to get started,
I think
what to keep in mind?
You feel your way. I think that's what I would always tell people. Don't start at 30 thinking that you're going to set up 10 schools. Start with setting up that one practice and then feel your way through it and build up. There's a lot of knowledge that's available, but you still don't have systematic practice available in India. If you were setting the same thing up in another country, now if I was setting up a school in Singapore, or in Dubai, or in America, or in England, for London for that matter, I would set it up very differently, because the kind of trained talent that you have available, the kind of support structures that you have available for inspection, for all of that, there is a lot that's available already. So you respond to that, and then you carve your individuality and your uniqueness within that. But in India, we still don't have all of that. The NEP is something that has been drafted, but NEP becoming a lived structure, we are very far from that.
True. And the progressive school seems to be the one who are saying, okay, some of it we are already sort of playing with, and the ones who haven't touched it, for them to really internalize it and bring it operational is a challenge at the
Yeah.
time.
I mean, you know how you need to know how to teach math, for example. You need to know how to what sources to go for history, and you need to know how to teach physics, because there's a sequence to that kind of knowledge. But a lot of how you teach, schools are not about that content. The content is available online and free today, and the pandemic has taught us that more than anything else, and was really available even before that with things like Khan Academy and others. It's not about that. It's about, schools are about social learning, how you create the context of learning for children. And in that social learning, I mean, if you're looking at just individual learning for a child, that's best done one-on-one with tutoring or with online stuff, right? If the child is motivated enough to learn themselves, which very few children would be, but tutoring, much faster way of teaching than social learning. But social learning is motivational. Social learning is the best kind of learning. So building that context of learning is what, that large canvas to play with, is what schools do. And they do that with time, space, relationships, routines, assessments, all of that. So we do it with all of that. And that is always context specific. Knowing the techniques of the subjects and things like that, that's important. But how you transact that is different for every school. And we see that with the best schools in India as well. We see completely different models existing from one school to another. Everything from timetabling practice to all of that. It would probably be more uniform in the UK or in the US, but that's not the case in India.
But let's
even
talk
today.
about the scale thing that you mentioned, right? If you were to open schools in either different parts of the country in India or overseas, why haven't you done that?
No interest. No interest at all. I mean, we're a living research project at Neev, and I think we enjoy the impact that we have. The place where the big schools started, or our grade 1 to 12 started, is the recognition that we fill the factories of the world. And when I'm saying factories, I'm not talking about manufacturing only, but I'm talking about research organizations, I'm talking about IT, I'm talking about all of that. Other than a couple of people like your Sundar Pichai and your Satya Nadella, you don't have that many. If you look statistically, we don't have enough Indians at the top, right? So for a country our size, with the kind of institutions that we've had, like the IITs and IIMs and all of that, we don't have people that are change makers, and we don't have people who are innovators. Globally, we talk about the top 1%, and some people say the top 0.5%, top 0.5%, top 0.05%, things like that. That become the Nobel Prize winners and become the people who are the discoverers and the innovators, right? Where is that percentage for India? If you start looking at that top, even 0.05%, forget about the 0.5% and 1%, the number of Indians that should be discovering and innovating should be huge. Yeah. So that's the place where we started Neev Academy from, to say, why do we not have more change makers and discoverers coming out of India? And that's what we started with. And, one campus is enough for that. Can we lead our children to want to make that kind of an impact? We have children who come from very elite families. They have a strong safety net under them. How to ensure that the children don't want to make that safety net a hammock and lose ambition, but to keep that alive and to treat that safety net like a trampoline instead, and to go and make impact in their lives. So that's something we are always talking with our children about, to say that what is the impact that you're going to seek in the world. And it's part of our mission statement as well, that you seek happy, healthy, impactful lives. So happy and healthy is not enough. Impact is what you seek as well. So I think if we have more change makers coming out from India, for India, in India, whichever one that is, it doesn't matter if it's not in India, even if they go somewhere else in the world. But, are they going to seek unique ways of thinking? Are they going to discover something? Are they going to collaborate differently? Are they going to bring their identity into the decisions that they are making? I think that's what we want to look at. I mean, we are filling the factories of the world on the level where, an army marches on its belly. And we're filling the factory of the belly, we're filling that, but we're not filling the top leadership. We're not filling boardrooms.
But do you
I
think
think
if you have more campuses, just hypothetically speaking, uh, you increase the impact just
you
because
can't
you're
have
touching more
multiple
lives?
campuses.
So,
You can't have multiple campuses and then seek this kind of impact.
okay,
You just, I mean,
help
it's
me unlock that.
um, so I think there is only one organization today that has really managed to do that
Interesting.
in the world, to do very high quality education. But I would argue that many of the children that come out of that don't necessarily seek
Which
impact,
organization?
and that's UWC.
Very
I know
true.
you love it too.
Yes.
So UWC, and not just Singapore, but UWC around the world, right? Because of the way it's structured, they operate at that kind of level. So the only school system that I find that has had that kind of a thought process and has still managed to scale, um, I don't see any other organization that
What
does
is
that. You
so
see a lot
unique
of
about them?
individual schools,
Yeah.
but I think today the UWCs are struggling, and I think they're struggling with both the teachers and their commitment, and they're also struggling with students becoming very comfortable again, and not seeking impact. So there is that as well. So the UWCs are struggling with that as well. So I think that entire elite creep has gotten into the UWCs as well, unfortunately. But I think the only organization that has done this at scale but they don't really operate like a chain of schools,
Yeah, yeah. They
Every
still have a lot of
school-
individuality. Like the
a
Singapore
lot
one is
of-
very different than what you may have in Pune or what you may have in other cities
Oh yeah,
around the world.
and the UK or
Yeah.
or South America or
Yes.
wherever. So I think it's each UWC operates very, very differently.
You said
with
it
a
like
large
context. They have local context very
they
well.
build in the
Yeah.
local context hugely,
Yeah.
but I think somewhere the fee level is bringing in that huge elite sort of mindset, and kids not necessarily seeking impact. So that
Yeah.
is a bit of a challenge. But I don't think, scale in education has to be looked at very differently from scale in any other place. This is not a manufacturing line. Variability is the desired thing. You look for the standard deviation, you don't look for the mean, is what you should be doing in education today. And that's the world over. If you look at great writers, for that matter, forget about innovators, right? You're looking at great writers, you're looking at neuroscientists. Two siblings in the same home will not be in the same career as the parents, and I think that's what they grew up. So you look for variability. Variability is a desired condition. It's not the outlier there. So how do you, when the moment you start thinking scale, you also start thinking cookie cutter, and you also start thinking, how do I ensure that each child does exactly the same thing everywhere? AI comes in, AI based plans come in, and then you say that you'll add human factors to that, but that doesn't really happen, because once you have a fully evolved plan, you don't touch it. So I think scale in education has to be thought very, very differently. I think if every child that's going out of your school is going to make impact in the world, that is our impact, right? So and that multiplies. So the way we look at it is, we are training not just the cognitive aspect of a child, but we are also training the ethical aspect, the physical aspect, the relational aspect. So there is all of that. We are even training the aesthetic of a child. So there is all of that goes into an education. And doing anything lesser than that, there will always be a very small statistic that will break out and will achieve great impact, but most of them won't. Can we change that? Is what we at Neev.
Yeah. So what I'm
Ask.
really hearing is that scale is almost counterintuitive to what education needs to be. Education needs to be more local context, needs to be
Absolutely.
sort of concentrated, high impact, rather than scale cookie cutter.
Absolutely. And it's not like a cult, because
Yeah.
I'm very scared of cults. It's not, it should never be that.
Yeah.
But I think scale in education is about being able to impact children.
Yeah.
It is about being able to grow skills all the time. That is, scale and impact has to be looked at very, very differently from, we figured that can't happen beyond a certain size.
Yeah. So
I
the
think
other way of scale I can think of it is, inspiring other founders to create models like Neev
Absolutely.
in their own local context?
Okay.
How do we do that?
I would not say I would never say to anybody create and early on in the Neev game when people used to come to us to say, oh, can we franchise the Neev
Yeah, of course,
preschools,
especially preschools,
so
yeah.
preschools in particular, right?
Yeah.
Because that's an existing model, and a
Yeah.
lot of people now reach out to us for academy as
Yeah.
well, for doing the same, and we don't do it, and I think it's and people said, well, if you don't start in that city, someone else will start like you there, and I'm like, yeah, that's
You
a great
should.
idea.
Yeah.
You should do that. It worries me. A school is about philosophy, and is it a lived philosophy or not, and I think it's about that. So long as it's a lived philosophy and you're honest about it, then it's up to a parent to make a choice that, do I align with this philosophy or not, and I think how much can you extend that philosophy? I think it's, over years, maybe just like the Krishnamurti Foundation schools started at a certain point and then grew. Today, you have a Krishnamurti Foundation school in the UK as well, besides many in India. And they do a great job. But that's over a long period of time. So, yeah, sure. Maybe another 10 years into Neev's journey, it'll be worth it for whoever is running the school at that point. I'm 55. I don't think I'll be running the school in 10 years from now. Whoever's running the school might make that decision to go into multiple campuses or go into another second campus. But for now, I think it's solving our problems on a single campus. Dealing with what children need on a single campus is challenge enough and satisfaction enough.
But do you consider yourself open source, as if people reach out to you about saying, hey, I don't want a franchise, but I'm inspired by the work that you're doing. How can I bring this in my context? Do you have conversations like that?
Anybody can go to our website and there is this place for booking a tour. And it's actually on the application page. So people won't often
Not
go
for
to
parents. Is it?
Anybody can go and book a tour.
Okay.
So, and there are educators I run into in conferences who say, hey, sorry, I went to your application page and I booked a tour on that and I came and saw when I didn't really have a child to bring. And I said, that was exactly what that was put there for. It just happens to be on the application page. And so that's why it gets confusing. But that's what it's for. I think we are very, very open door and we encourage that. We don't encourage cohorts of teachers coming in. So we sometimes get contacted by people from other countries and also from India, also from Bangalore, to bring in 30 educators to do an observation. That's hard. And for that, we need downtime. And we always have so much happening that's
it's not
hard.
an intent thing, it's just feasibility thing, is it?
It's a feasibility thing, that how do you ensure that we do it without disrupting the functioning of the school? So that's the hard thing. But we are very open to tours. People are very welcome to, when they make a choice of the tour, they also make a choice of whether you're an applying parent or not. The or not is there. So we're very open door and people do come and visit us and they're welcome to.
You've not thought of, a lot of the founders, especially who have built these sort of expertise over the years, they're doing founder cohorts as well, where they're bringing in school owners to come and learn from their journey.
As an IB school, we are always part of those networks.
Okay.
So groups of schools always come and visit. But it's not a contrived. It's not like a thought of having. And we are not. We don't consider ourselves to be very arrived as such. We are in good rankings and globally and in India, and that's all good. But we don't consider ourselves, we always look at ourselves very much as a work in process. And I think if we have to say anything, then I would say that, research is very much part of, and now that we have a community, we don't just do the research ourselves, we also do the research with community. For example, the next round of campus building that we are doing, our children, our parents, our teachers are all part of that.
All the stakeholders are involved in
all
their
the
inputs
stakeholders are involved in that. Our board members are all involved in asking questions of what does the future of learning look like and what does the future campus of Neev look like? What do we want the culture of Neev to be? How will the campus support that?
Interesting. I also wonder that, as a founder, we get into those reflection mode once in a while saying, okay, this is my mission that I've been working towards. Am I drifting from my mission or not? Does that thought ever come to you? And what are the signals you look for to align yourself to that central core value of yours?
Children. It's always children. When we get faced by a challenge is the time that we go back to say that, did we stray? So it's always that, and you run into problems all the time. So we always attach values to every decision that we make, and sometimes it becomes hard to explain that to a parent that we are attaching values to this decision. But it's that's what we are constantly doing as a leadership group as well, but also on our governing board we are constantly doing that. That what are our values, and are we making our decision based on the values that we care about? And the child is always at the center of all of those decisions. So it's and I can't say that we succeed with every child.
Yeah.
We have situations where we are successful, and many of them are that.
Yeah.
We have situations we are not successful, and there are fewer of that.
Yeah.
And then we have situations that are debatable, where we
Yeah.
think that we are successful, but a parent doesn't think that. And we find ourselves in that place of telling the parent that, hey, we consider this a success story.
Yeah.
And the parent says, no, I don't think that's a success story. So, so we have that. But I think it's always the child at the center for us, and how the child will succeed most. For us at Neev, it's never about the topper of the cohort. We are never working to raise the top. We are always working to pick up the bottom. Because, I think...
And the average goes up.
Average goes up.
Yep.
This is the scale. You can either say that I'll pull the top up, but I think the traction that creates leaves the bottom so far away that that's not how we function. We always work to move the scale up, and we are always doing that. Even on academic scores, we are always doing that. But we don't do that by picking up the top. And we always tell parents that, if you're looking for a 45, please don't come to us. We'll be very happy with the 43 and 44. So yeah, if your child has a 45 in them, they'll get the 45, but I think it's picking up the bottom is always our goal. Our goal is to keep the bottom for our IB, the grades operate between a 24, which is a pass basic, and a 45, which is the top grade. We don't aim for a 24. Our goal is to keep 30 at the bottom. We'll have children who'll slide below that, and that's fine. That will happen sometimes, but we are always aiming to keep our bottom at 30, and therefore then the top then takes care of itself. I mean, we have a ridiculous average. We have some 50% of our kids are in the top something percent of those numbers. But it's not because we are trying to get those kids to that, because the top, we always believe, takes care of itself. It's the bottom that you need to deal with, and pick the bottom up all the time. Our kids that are on learning support sometimes do much better than kids that are neuronormal even. So things like that. And it's not like we're looking for learning support children, but if they are part of that whole continuum, they're there. So I think the way we work with kids is always pick up the bottom, the top will take care of itself.
But that's a very interesting thing you bring me to is, assessments and grades and how to measure student success.
Yeah.
Right? According to you, I understand that, sometimes parents just understand the language of marks. They're not able to see those day-to-day changes or initiatives that the school may be focused on, which may have a compounding effect on life of chasing excellence or becoming self-directed learners and all of that. So how do you deal with that? I mean, educating the parents also in that regards, and then for your own self-evaluation in terms of what are those attributes you consider as a success?
So, at Neev, we are always doing that. We are constantly picking up that number.
Okay.
Right. So we are...
Which is the grade number?
Grades, yes.
Okay. That's
it always
ultimately...
matters, right? So we are always picking that up. But that grade number looks like many things to us. It doesn't look like just one number. It looks like a bell curve. It looks like averages. It looks like so many numbers that we focus on to constantly move that scale up. If you look at just simply our IB scores, we started with a 30 point something average, and our last cohort was 38.5 as an average, and that's huge. For a relatively new school, we've only had 6 graduating cohorts. So I think it's so we are constantly there are many metrics that we look at. So we start early with looking at a metric like reading, for example, and our reports for our children, for our youngest children, even in primary grade 1 and 2, always has a bell curve of reading in there. And we publish what is global standards for that age group. And then we put where the curve of the class is, and we put where the dot of that child is, right? So now a parent can't necessarily do something with saying how to get you to be the top person in math, but a parent can do a lot with reading. And reading is an early indicator of how you're going to do in with academics. So things like that. We always say that, our bell curve is always leaning right. So we are always looking for that. We start doing those bell curves early. In grade one, all those bell curves start. And we found that unless we put those bell curves in, we could not get our parents to understand how the child was doing. All those, emerging, excelling, all of that was not working so
They were
well,
vague.
especially for parents where we needed to have a partnership where something needed to change at home, right? Like routines and or values or things like that, or too many classes sometimes. So things like that. So it's so publishing those bell curves made that conversation very straightforward to say that, hey, this is normal, and our bell curve is always to the right. So your child is always doing better than most places in the world. But if you want to do something more with that, you can do something with it. You can work with your child on reading. So reading is that first indicator for us. So we use many such. We also use preparedness for class. We also look at discipline like attendance and things like that. And all that matters. We also look for discipline of submission of tasks. As an IB school, you have a lot of tasks along the way. Submitting everything before time and not on time and not late. Then a child who constantly finds themselves in the place that I submitted it late, but hey, my teacher allowed me, right? Don't ask. Don't ask for that. Always submit beforehand so that you have the.
Before time is the new on time is what you guys align with?
It's not before time is the new on time. I think it's meeting your deadlines and your commitments thoughtfully, with enough time to spare.
With intention, yeah.
With enough time to spare and to do well instead of just in time. It's nice for Toyota manufacturing, not for human capability. I mean, human capability is so much greater.
Yeah.
It's when you leave those. So our AI policy and instruction or, academic honesty policy always, when we say what can parents do for ensuring academic honesty and not use AI wrongly for tasks, we talk about building healthy time management at home for that, which is kind of counterintuitive. What are you going to do with that? Because when children are ready ahead of time, they're not going to choose the lazy and quick options, right? We are given to that. So how do you ensure healthy time management? So kids who are reading early and reading vociferously and widely, kids who are submitting things on time, kids who are always in school a few minutes early rather than always late. So things like that. Kids who have full attendance or close to full attendance, those are the ones. Kids who always turn up for sports practice. So those are the kids that
So basically behavioral things is something that you're putting a lot of emphasis
we
on.
look at that. Readiness for class. So many of those metrics are what we map. So and I think and those get mapped to grades.
Is this unique to Neev or is this defined by the assessment boards also?
It's not required by assessment boards.
Okay. So this is something homegrown, unique to Neev that you guys are focusing on.
I think if we had an IB school in say Switzerland, or if I was operating that, I probably wouldn't be doing that. But I think it's because of where we are right now, IB education is still, it's popular, but it's still not part of the mindset as such. The context around that is not adequately developed. So to show the leading indicators that lead to success in a progressive education, which requires long-term planning of your time and systematic thinking, it just requires...
So they're much ahead of this stuff. That's why they don't need to track this in those countries? Culturally, they're more progressed in that area.
I wouldn't say more progressed. I think I would not say more progressed at all, but we are different. And I think the scarcity mindset has been so deeply embedded in us, and I think you see that because when you go to international, you're traveling internationally, why do you see a line at the Indian flight and not at the flight that is going to say Chicago or something like that, right? Why do you see that all the time? I think the scarcity mindset is so, and we don't have the scarcity anymore. I mean, if you had to order a phone, you had to wait in a line and you had to do contacts, if you had to do a gas cylinder. So to me, even today, when my kitchen guys say that, oh yeah, we'll add a second gas cylinder there, it's just like, oh, can we get a second gas cylinder? So I think I think the scarcity mindset is so built into us that we think that we need that simple metric of grade, and that's the only thing that's going to open the next door. But the thought process that they are leading and I think that's a story which is very close to my heart, because I went to this school in Mumbai. And I wasn't a very good student all the way through. I was not very motivated. I was clever. I was reading a lot. I was doing all of that, but I was not motivated with grades. And there were 49 kids in my class. And early on, my parents, and I used to be around 30, and my parents used to always talk to me about being in the top three, and somewhere around grade 9 and 10, they started saying, oh, top 15, and I thought, oh, I've let them down because they've brought
Their
their
expectation has gone down.
Their expectation has gone down, right? And then I started working harder as a result of that. And then I got a university rank in my bachelor's and my master's and all of that. I could do well, but I think it's that, so how do you so I think that story is so close to my heart that, you don't let down your expectations for children. You always uphold high expectations, but don't make the high expectations only a number or a rank. Make that much wider as a sign of success. So I think that's what we profess at Neev, and that's what we live by. And that's why we report on those leading indicators that are going to lead to all of this stuff. We have families where there are 3 kids who've been late all the time for school, late on deadlines, late on arriving to school, and all of that, and I think it was always that the third child managed to set right their routines and actually reach on time, and we were so happy with that. And then the family had the 4th child, and that 4th child is always on time, and we are like, wow, that's
so you
great.
made an impact even into a whole household,
on something
so to
ridiculous
speak.
like that, so I think some of this data we analyze now also, and we look at what are these indicators and what is that going to say about life. I think our best students are the ones who have a strong profile on all of this right from the start and still have humility and don't have arrogance with that. I think it's that bit is that you need to sort out. So we always say on one side being a self-directed learner, on the other side being a community builder. To do that, you need to be humble. You need to be grateful. You need to recognize that there's a whole world that contributes to who you are. But you need to be self-driven as well in the learning choices that you're making. So I think it's all of those complexities that come together. How can you do multiple campuses with that?
Yeah.
So it's,
going back to that,
I think you're constantly looking at kids who are motivated, who are not motivated in class. Why are they not motivated? They just haven't found their motivation. Or are there skills which are lacking because of which they've not found them? So it's always that, right? So that's what we are constantly looking at. We are looking at research projects and seeing who's making those difficult choices, who's making aspirational choices, and the one who's making aspirational choices, how well are they doing versus the ones who made the simple choice and then did well. So I think it's all of that goes into building the profile of a child and knowing how that child is getting ready for the world. That's what we do at Neev.
No, I think this is
It's
great
crazy
insight.
stuff.
This is great.
We bring home the woods.
This is great insight because for the educators and different schools, in their own context listening, I think the message is very clear that we find those wider net attributes which can be contextual to your values, because aligning it to your school's values is very important. And if you're able to do that, you can use that as a wider net that you're talking about. And obviously, whatever assessment board you might be doing, that will take care of itself. But the value system and identifying those key attributes for your own context is very important.
And our goal is always to build that to self-awareness, finally. That the time that which, there was this beautiful story, I think it was Ruchir Sharma or someone who had it in a very beautiful book. And the story was about this African king who is training the prince, and he says that you keep going back to the jungle every time. And the prince says that, I've gone back to the jungle. I know what the jungle is about. I know how to hunt. And he says you keep going back and you keep going back and you keep going back till you can hear the rustle of the leaves and you know what's happening. And then you keep going back even after that until you can hear the flutter of the butterfly's wings, and that's what you go back to. So I think, how do we train ourselves to do that when we are bringing up children? But how do you train children to do that for themselves? To measure that, how am I doing? To come to self-awareness of that kind. Every time we succeed with that, with a child, we feel so great about it. And there's always, I think life is always a work in process with children in particular. But that's what we aim for, that level of self-awareness where you can turn the mirror inwards and you can look at yourself and say, who am I becoming? Not just who am I, how do I want someone to perceive me, or what is my collective identity, but who am I becoming? If children can be questioning that, that's
And
essentially
that
what we are
sense
seeking
of
at Neev.
reflection continuously is something that is the need of the hour for every child,
Huge.
because that gives them self-awareness, that gives them the identity that you've been talking about, and that gives
Huge.
them that, okay, I can
And
pause
it's
and
not
think and
just,
take action based
you
on
know,
what I'm
that
reflecting.
and that kind of reflection is not just a matter of just reflecting on your academics, right? Because you don't know where that reflection is going to come from. So when we travel on our learning journeys, we see a child reflect. This girl reflected on something that she saw in Khajuraho on a temple wall, you know, and her piece, when she reflected on something that she saw there, it told me a completely different story about her than what I've seen her do in debate, what I've seen her do in academics. So I think it's, you know, a well-rounded human being is all of that put together. But it's not, as Tagore, Aristotle, and many others have said, it's, you don't learn from your experiences. You actually learn from reflecting on those experiences. When you see that reflection in writing is when you know that the child is reflecting. So the evidence of that is what matters. That's when you know that the impact is there. Otherwise, it's kind of floating in the environment somewhere. Maybe it's happening, maybe it's not happening, but you want to see that on paper. And
How
that's
do you
what
train children to be reflective?
it's actually, you know what, you don't train children for that. We
How does that
actually
come about?
we I think as a society we take that away, unfortunately. Children are natural scientists.
Curious learners.
They're natural scientists,
Okay.
you know, and that's what happens with a baby, right? That you give them a piece of food and they're figuring it out,
Fidgeting,
and they're
yeah.
figuring out
Putting
how
everything in their mouth.
everything to their mouth, and they're like little
Sensories,
scientists,
yeah,
right? And they're reflecting on it all the time, and from that they're making different choices the next time, you know. They're even reading faces all the time and expressions and things like that, right? So children are just natural scientists, and they're given to reflect and then make better choices, right? We as a society don't respect that. We then want them to do standing lines and sleeping lines and beat that, what is very natural and intuitive in a child. We beat it out of children. It's really about nurturing what's natural in a child, and I think that happens when children are reflecting. What we do train them for is for the habit of reflection, that when you reflect, you will take time. You don't just do something quickly and then you walk away from that. It's immersive. You will spend time doing it. And then when you're happy, you'll give it to us. So I think it's always that. So we take them to a lot of immersive experiences, and then we reflect. So the daily reflection that happens on what happened in math today and what happened is very different from what you are doing for a major event, or how am I doing in sports, or I went to a learning journey, say to Khajuraho or Hampi or wherever, or, you know, Ladakh, I went on a trek. I mean, one of the things that one of the girls, I was reading in an essay from a Ladakh, and she said, learning journey, and she said, maybe the mountain is not outside, maybe the mountain is me. And with everything that I'm choosing to do, I'm changing the shape of the mountain a little bit every day. Wow. You know, and that's beautiful, right? Because
Very
you think of, I mean, that child is
That's
arrived.
very deep.
She's arrived at that place where she's turned the mirror inwards.
Inwards, yeah.
Can we keep her there? In that place where she will, and they won't do it continuously, you know. I mean, I think every day that will change, but she knows how to do that. I know that she knows how to do that now. Or that girl that reflected in Khajuraho, I know that she knows how to do that and think of what's changing in life. So I think I think reflection is something which is very natural to humans, but we as society take away curiosity, we take away reflection, we take away scientific thinking. It's really about nurturing what's very intuitive and inherent in every child, protecting that and taking that further. Relationships, being kind is intuitive. Yeah. No one learns how to be unkind and be mean. Yeah. They learn that from things that they see.
Or it's a reflection of their experiences. They felt that someone was unkind to them, and they're just reciprocating that to the world.
And they are doing that. And then in another place where they can be unkind, they will be unkind quickly. And they don't get stopped. So they continue to be unkind because that becomes the easy thing to do. So I think many of these things are just inherent in human nature. There's another thing that's inherent in human nature. It is to think fast and not think slow.
Interesting.
So there's that, and that's what AI creates a problem with.
Yeah.
Because Daniel Kahneman proposed the thinking fast, thinking slow, type 1, type 2 thinking. Humans can give into the nature which is to want to think fast, system one, all the time, and not the slow, effortful thinking, right? How do you create more opportunities for the slow, effortful thinking is what reflection is all about.
It trains you to do that, actually.
AI is a separate story. One of the reasons why we don't like to bring AI into children's lives
Let's
is
talk
because
about that, yes.
it's always about thinking fast, and it's about the quick solutions and quick fixes.
So let's talk. I mean, you brought a great point about AI and the advent of that and the increasing impact in schools that AI is creating. What I've heard from you is a very contrarian to what you're hearing at a lot of schools. A lot of schools
Yeah.
are opening themselves
Yeah.
to AI. Here
Yeah.
you are. You're talking about these deep reflection
Yeah.
things and how AI is not good for
Yeah.
that. So share with us your thought
Yeah.
on
AI
how
is anti-deep reflection. I think it's the opposite of that. If you can recognize, a while back, a child way before AI, but with digital literacy, a while back, a child told me that the digital work makes me think fast and reading makes me think slow. Reading a physical books makes me think slow and think slowly, and reading something digitally on the internet makes me think fast. Now when I think about it much later in an AI world, that's what you're giving to, right? Click click click, you go to multiple points, you build very quick knowledge, you learn a lazy way of thinking, right? You don't want to apply thought, you don't want to immerse yourself to create new knowledge there. I think so that's what I think in schools we have to embrace AI. I don't think we walk away from that, but embracing AI does not mean using AI in children's lives. AI tools today in education and with young learners have the potential of doing more harm than good. So, understanding what AI does or AI literacy is important, but using AI, we have not seen any benefit of it.
So if a parent asks you that,
Yeah.
can my child use ChatGPT or any AI tool for homework, what do you say?
I don't think any parent is going to be asking us that, because I think parents
They already know
intuitively-
at your school that they don't.
I know, and not just in our school, parents intuitively know the answer to that, right? Children don't agree with that because children prefer the quick thinking. So don't put that into their hands is the point, right? And to get them to recognize that so we work a lot with our children. Our children at Neev have developed the AI policy. It's still in draft mode right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a bunch of
Student
kids.
driven.
Yeah, we figured
Wonderful.
we may as well turn it over to them, because
Yeah.
when we did a quick survey, we saw that children had this sense of saying that we want to be fully free to use AI, anything that we want. But they had this thought process that somehow the adults are going to keep us safe, right? So they said, leave us free, but keep us safe, is what they said. So we said, what is a good idea for you guys to draft the AI policy for the school? So they drafted that, and they did a lot of research in different tools and everything that's out there. They looked at a lot of frameworks, and they came to the thought process that AI literacy is important, recognizing where you can use it, where you shouldn't use it. Some of the points in that are also about this, that if you find yourself not knowing what you're doing, if you find yourself not having understood what you're searching, that entire prompt training for children, things like that, that's just absolutely wrong. And our kids recognize that. To get them to be honest about that is another story altogether, because it's easier, obviously. But I think kids know it inherently, parents know it, educators know it. And, I think the reason why, if you ask that why are you, you asked about the impact of AI in education. The impact today is not positive in education. Why are you not finding schools standing up and publishing models and frameworks to say, hey, use AI like this? Why are you not finding that?
But are they
Right?
not? Aren't there schools who are openly saying, hey, we embrace AI, we're encouraging students to use AI in their coursework?
The furthest that schools have gone, and I'll give you two examples. there are lots and lots of schools today that are talking about a particular AI tool, which is Flint, and they talk about Flint being their certified AI tool. And the second thing that I want to mention is AI in the as an analytical tool for analyzing what a child already knows and what can how the child can fast forward learning. So that's a second space that you find AI being used for. I mean, the best model for that, the second one is Alpha School in the US, and is the most expensive school I think in the world, even more than UWC's. Is $75,000 a year. But they basically crunch the learning day of a child to 2 hours, and then the rest of the day the child is working on projects. I would just ask the question, why do you need to do that? Do you not want the children to be able to build relationships and do a lot more with that? Why do you need to crunch the learning time of every child? Why do you want to make life so robotic and efficient for children? So I don't see value in that. I don't see value in the use of AI for anything other than organizing time, for organizing itineraries, routines, things like that. That's where we see the benefit of AI, and we tell children that as much. But in the generation of knowledge, it's actually not just inefficient, it actually teaches kids to be lazy. We see that kids that are using AI even for research, they become resistant to the harder work. So they become resistant to reading. They develop, everyone has writer's block. I have writer's block, but they find it hard to fight writer's block and be able to write because they're so used to finding a prompt quickly using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. And I think it's is that, I think human intelligence is so much greater than what AI is at. I was reading this report which was talking about the intelligence level of all the tools that are available. And there are three things that stood out in that big, long report for me. One was the intelligence level. The second one was the omniscience and hallucination. And the third one was openness. And you know what? The tools that were top in each one of those three measures were altogether different. So which tool are you going to use in that case? And Flint was not on any one of those. So I think what are you going to use then? I think it's about that. So I think there's so much of, Gemini is built into every Google search that you do, right? So I think and that knowledge is so easy for kids. You find kids building arguments without knowing the underlying knowledge, and you're doing yourself great harm to do that. And then we have to remind children that, an examiner can see that also. Because an examiner will be able to see two arguments which are exactly the same, lacking the knowledge. And that's when the kids, but it's, they change the way they are functioning. Cognitive offloading is a term that has been used since the middle of last year. Brain rot is becoming a term that is being used more frequently now.
You're not exercising the brain muscle is what you're saying.
Brain rot, cognitive offloading, neural networks don't develop. The study that came out of MIT and then following that with Stanford, where the brain networks don't fire up. So because of that, therefore then that leading to brain rot. But what's also coming up now is that the tide is turning, and there are many more people that are talking about this, the harm that AI is doing to learners, and that's a lot of research coming out of America as well, but also out of other parts of the world that's talking about that. And that tide is turning; it's turning fast, and I think educators are the last bastion in this, and you don't see anyone who's jumping all in and saying, there might be some random schools that are doing that, but you don't see educators at large jumping in, right? And saying that, let's go. AI is the way to go, and using AI is the way to go in the future. You're not finding, why is that? Because the use case and the benefit of that is not so visible. So educators are holding out. The moment educators give in and jump in, go all in, it'll be done. Because then we will have just AI users coming out of our schools. And what good is that? When I was talking about that report and intelligence levels of all of these tools, it did not compare with human intelligence anywhere. And they can't, because human intelligence is so unlimited. If you had this, it's, is it evolving, or is it that we were simply not using it? what AI is now telling us is that we were using human intelligence at such a low level, and it's reminding us that you need to do so much better with human intelligence and step it up so that the work that you do using your brain should not be equivalent to what an AI tool is doing.
But you often hear this analogy, and I'm sure you
And
must
we
have
always
heard-
tell our kids that also, that, given the same data sets,
Yeah.
you will come to the same conclusion. Yes,
it'll take more time, but
it'll take
you'll
more
arrive
time,
there. Yeah.
but you will arrive there. If you can understand that, and then in a work scenario, you can learn to use AI tools to crunch some of that work, that's okay. But if you can't do this, that's a problem.
So you're saying that it's like, the analogy that I was getting to is like, when calculators first came out, let's imagine that time, right?
Good analogy.
Right? Because at that time, we're like, oh, even
Yeah.
even when I was in
It's a
school,
very good
we were
analogy.
not allowed to use calculators. Like, okay, you need to learn how to do the long division.
Yeah.
You were required to do how to do
Yeah.
manual multiplications
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah. Can
And
we-
conceptually, you had to get that right.
I want to use it also. I want to use another analogy as well, and I'll use the analogy of a library that we're
Okay.
sitting in right now. Can we treat AI like a calculator, which is a very basic tool, right? But can you also treat it like a library? Alison Gopnik, the neuroscientist, speaks about how kids today are using AI as a cultural exchange, and they shouldn't use it as a cultural exchange. It's a place where everything is happening, right from research to writing to quick search for information to relationships to all of that is going to AI. Can they not use it as a cultural exchange? Can they treat it instead like a library? It's more than a calculator, for sure. Can they treat it like a library? And it's a different kind of library. Learn to do the heavy lifting before you go to the easy way of thinking. Otherwise, you'll go to Daniel Kahneman's theory of human beings are given to being lazy and system one thinking. So I think it's that's where we stand right now with this. I'm not saying that this couldn't change. Maybe there'll be more out there that will change this on its head. But today, as AI stands, the use case is not there.
But do you think that keeping them away is one side of extreme thing? Overly dependent on is the other side of the spectrum. But there is a balance where they say, okay, can we encourage them responsible usage where they know what to be critical of and what not to be critical of? Don't just believe everything that is coming out of AI. I mean, that awareness, don't you think is important
Daniel
for the children?
Kahneman talks about the system one thinking evolving with many years of practice. Heuristics are important. Quick ways of thinking are important, and those are heuristics, right, for quick decision making. But you develop that with many, many, many years of training and learning, right? So unless you know how to do the slow and effortful, you're never going to learn how to do the quick, the fast and
So you're saying to be critical, you have to learn the slow way. Then
you
only
have
you
to
can
develop
be the critical.
you have to develop your heuristics first. Unless you develop your heuristics, AI is giving you pre-developed heuristics which are the same for everyone out there. So we will be a Wall-E movie, you remember that? We'll be Axiom. And it was such a profound movie, right? The planet is called Axiom.
Axiom, yeah.
And where all these people are floating around because they all have the same and that's what it is. In a world where everyone has the same information and everyone has the same arguments, how are you going to work in that world is the question, right? And it's just you really need to think about that. Even
So
when
you feel
you're
uniqueness of humans
Even-
get lost with AI?
absolutely. That's absolutely true because that's exactly what it is that, you are, and it's not just AI, right? This already existed before that because we were all looking at the same knowledge sources. Now we are looking at the digestion of the same knowledge sources. It's even worse. We're not even looking at the same knowledge sources. Can we be looking at different knowledge sources ourselves? To think that when you have a conflict or when you have a game or when you have a simple thing like a debate for that matter or a problem that you're solving, what are the different ways that you could solve this? If everyone comes at it with the same argument, what will you have, right? You don't have, problems will not get solved. They will not get sorted. There are lots of people today that talk about, I'm not saying that AI is not useful. I'm not Luddite. But I think it's, and I'm a biotechnologist by education. I think some of the complex problems of protein folding, which were not solved for 30 years, got solved using open mind. And, I think that's huge, right? So I think you can't deny that contribution. But I'm talking about with our young, the use case is not there. With people who have developed ways of thinking, they can
So at a university
apply
level,
it.
maybe it is the right time, you think?
I don't think even at a university level,
Really?
and I think it's. I look at my daughter, and we were arguing. She's at Ashoka,
Yeah.
and she used AI tools for a course, and then she ended up getting a B plus on that course. And she's she's one of those gold star girls.
Yeah.
Needs to get an A or
Yeah.
if an A plus was possible. And she couldn't. And just a couple of days before that, she's mentioned using AI tools for digesting the reading. I said, "Oh, how's that going?" She said, "No, well, I would have still done that because the young won't change their mind on
Yeah.
something like that."
Yeah.
But I think not even in university. I think it's still a place for critical thinking and developing the abilities to digest more and more knowledge sources and put new knowledge together is the time that creativity hits. So you still want to hang in there through your bachelor's, through your master's. You can start to develop a sense of responsibility, and I think around somewhere between 21 and 23, where the prefrontal cortex closes and develops, and a decision making is firmly established. You now are making decisions based on what you know and what you can understand. I think somewhere there is where it switches.
You feel the same
So
about
it's-
cell phones?
Cell phones are a tool.
Okay.
That's different.
Okay. Well, I mean, just
It's a
access
tool.
to cell phones and everything else that comes with it in smartphones these days for kids. This is every household.
I'm on that page. So smartphones for kids, not a requirement at all. Cell phones for
Safety, security and all that,
safety,
yeah.
security, easy access, things like that. But you don't have analog phones available anymore.
Yeah.
You only get the smartphones. So the simplest possible phone is what we say, and then keep it out of your child's life. If your child is going to the phone too often, then they are basically not going in there because they're attracted to the internet, because human interaction is always more attractive. They're going in there because they are feeling a discomfort with that, and they're retreating into a place where their sense of self-worth is getting attached to what they're doing on the device. So things like that. So healthy relationships with devices is what we always say. We also profess things like, putting your laptops and your screens in a place where someone can walk by and see what you're doing on that. So I think things like that. Oh yeah. I mean, no closed doors. Early on, and you keep your screen on, because you're not in that place where I can leave you in the middle of. It's like, you put kids on the internet, and it's like leaving a child in the middle of, Hindi, Bollywood. Forget the child in the middle of a mela, and then, what's the child going to do? Going to be quite lost, right? And go to the closest attraction. So I think it's leaving children unsupervised till the time that they develop those control mechanisms and an understanding of where they want to go. I think that's important. Human mind is, again, because of evolution, is drawn to negativity more than positivity,
Absolutely.
right?
Negativity
So-
always gets more attention.
Negativity always, and it's easier, right?
Yes.
So it is always that. So if you leave the untrained mind in the middle of all of this, is going to get attracted more to the negative news, the negative movies. Why are so many more movies negative than positive? I think
They sell more.
It's that they sell more, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's that's where the world is, unfortunately. And what sells is what people produce more. So there's much more of the negative stuff
It's
on
like a
the
vicious
internet.
cycle, more
And there's
getting-
much more of that.
Yeah.
There's much more of that. And when you see one that you like, then the system tells you many more, whether
Yeah.
it's YouTube videos, apps,
It'll
sources,
keep punching that back to
even
you.
research papers, and of course movies and
Yeah.
things like that, TV series, all of that. They're very formulaic,
Yeah.
and they just follow that
Algorithms
model,
just
and
follow you.
and they just get you hooked to that. Even children's literature, for that matter, much more negative than positive. And how do you choose from within that to say what is Philip Pullman, a fabulous writer, and he spoke about the responsibility of children's writers that use negative emotion logically, not as clickbait, because it's a very easy clickbait to throw in. So using negative emotions, authors have to exercise responsibility. Do you think the internet is exercising responsibility in creating negative content for children that are not yet conscious of how they are thinking? I think those are the challenges that we have, that we're living in a very difficult time for young children. And I think the longer you keep them off devices, the better off they are. They'll learn the harder habits, and they'll learn to enjoy the harder habits. Interestingly, when you get a child addicted to reading, they start enjoying it so much, nothing else replaces that. When you get a child attached to critical thinking, they enjoy that so much that they like exercising. Now, critical thinking requires reading, requires research, requires communication, requires so much to be put together. But a child who gets attracted to critical thinking is going to want to do much more of that. But if a child doesn't require to do any critical thinking, they're not even probably going to, they're quickly going to switch out of reading as well. So, how can you train the child early on? The only way to do that is to keep devices out of children's lives and choose to bring them in when it's required and choose the simplest one to bring in, not the most complicated one.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Something very foundational to Neev, and Neev means foundation, is reading, right? And you've doubled down on that with the Neev Literature Fest, and something that is very unique to a school or a school environment. What I got curious about when I learned about this is, why reading? Why not technology, sports, leadership, all these things which are popular among schools, across India or even globally? Why that emphasis on reading, and what got you to it?
It's not that we don't have an emphasis on technology, science, sports. That is very there. In fact, our science facilities, our sports facilities, for that matter, are the best in Bangalore. We are doubling down and quadrupling down on that as well, because with our expanded campus, we're going from a 200-meter track to a 400-meter track. We are building full-fledged, indoor sports. From a 25-meter heated pool, we're going to a 50-meter Olympic-sized heated pool because of Bangalore weather, things like that. So there's a lot of, sports is a very big part of Neev and our kids' lives. And so is science. We have some of the best labs. We believe that science should inspire, and because of which our labs are from this very good manufacturer of science equipment called Waldner. So all our labs are Waldner. And now in the new campus, we are changing the imagination of how science labs exist. So that's huge at Neev as well. But all of that happens, in the life of any elite school. That's going to happen. Sports is going to happen. Theatre is going to happen. Science is going to happen. Math is going to happen. Reading is hard. Reading is a hard habit. And Marianne Wolf, the reading warrior, she talks about how we are tuned to learn how to walk, learn how to talk. But we are not, because that's just natural. We will learn it. We will walk from just seeing what's around us. But reading is not, we are not tuned to read. Actually, reading is a hard habit. It involves, and she talks about the circus in the brain. How it goes in from one side of the brain and then goes to another side of the brain and has to come back again to make sense and to be able to make connections with what you're reading. So reading is scientific, but it's not innate in us. And because of that, we walk away from reading very easily. In a world that's changing all the time, if there's one habit that matters, that will make a difference to, or one skill that you require, is reading. But reading is hard.
And why do you feel like that?
In a digital world, it becomes even harder because Marianne Wolf talks about the cognitive lollipops that exist, and you think about that visual of that, the cognitive lollipops. Yeah. Because there's something, you click something, you get rewarded for that behavior and you can keep going, right? Yeah. Because you'll keep getting those cognitive lollipops.
That's where the scrolls are coming from.
Exactly. So reading is just a hard habit, but reading is essential for lifelong learning. You've already heard those adages of every leader is a reader and, and all of that. You've heard that. And those are all true. Elon Musk talks about reading like a book a day or something like that. I don't believe that. But I think it's reading is so important for understanding this world today. It's a hard habit. So when we started with building reading in, you need to be doing, we always say a good writer is first a good reader. You want to get better at writing? Start reading more. And the more you read, the better you'll write. So I think it's that. But in a world where literature is exploding, We have more books available today, even for children, than there ever were, including Indian children's literature, right? And non-fiction, and books on education, and books on technology. But the world is going away from that. A significant part of the world is going. And the distance between people who are reading and the people who are not reading is increasing greatly. How do we ensure that more of our children are reading is what we started with as a question. Reading was just not cool. Science is cool. Math is cool. Reading is not cool. Reading is a hard habit. Kids don't discuss books, is what we found, that they don't talk to each other. They talk to each other about music. And they don't talk to each other about books. How do you get them talking about books? We decided about, well, I think the way we looked at it is music is cool. Kids like to talk about music. Reading also needs to be cool. And so that's why we started the festival around reading, to make reading cool. And it is largely cool at Neev today as a result of everything that we do with reading. That's why it started off. The place where the Neev Lit Fest started is the Jaipur Lit Fest. Mm-hmm. I used to go back to that all the time as a reader. And just when it started growing, I stopped liking it. Mm-hmm. But even then, every time I go back to JLF, I would always find something that changed my life, and I think I would find a book that was just so important. And that serendipity that happens is something that will only happen when you're in a place like that. But children's literature at that point was not even a sideshow. And even today in all festivals, whether it's BLF or any others, it's always a sideshow. We wanted to see what would happen with a place where the way JLF teaches adult literature, if we treated children's literature and we made that center stage, what would that be like? That's what Neev Lit Fest started with. It's a place where children's literature, children's writers, children are center stage. We don't actually encourage children to write books. It's very popular right now for children to be writing books. Yes. We don't encourage children to write books because we always tell our children that if you have a book in you, hang in there, keep writing, and you'll write a great book someday. But you need to hang in there and you need to train yourself a bit more. So children are there, children are reading, authors are talking about their books, authors are learning from each other. I think it's a place for role modeling that reading is a hard habit, and when you build community around reading, that hard habit becomes fun. That's what we do the Neev Lit Fest.
But a school which gets inspired by this, and like you said, this movement has to be much larger than just one school or one city. How do a school, sitting in a tier 2, tier 3 city, where, because I'm sure this requires support from the parent community and the mindset of the ecosystem around you. How does one sort of propel this in their environment? So
when we first started the Neev Lit Fest, a couple of years into it, everybody started noticing it. And people started thinking of this as a marketing event. And they started doing Lit Fest. There was some sprouting.
Marketing?
No, not for us.
Okay.
Not for us. It was really
being there for other people.
For other people, they started looking at this as branding, for the school. For us, we wanted it to be our brand, but we wanted it to be a brand the hard way.
Yeah.
So there was sudden proliferation of Lit Fests in schools at that point of time. And people would invite writers and they would have some discussions.
Doing that. Okay.
But putting a Lit Fest together is not easy.
Yeah.
That balance of getting the right balance of speakers, writers, publishers, creators, illustrators is hard. Putting together panel discussions and workshops and things like that is really, really hard. To bring out
a lot of curation,
many different perspectives is just very hard. So we've now seen that petering away.
Yeah.
We actually take the festival to, in some ways, to other places through a couple of things. One is we do a lot of work with children's literature. We fund fellowships, so we want to grow Indian children's writing. But the second thing that is much larger that we do to take it to across the country, and now it's going global as well, is the Neev Reading Challenge. Okay. We started this during the pandemic, and it was really small because there was so much of online stuff happening. Our goal is always to see how can you bring together a community of readers, right? So how can you bring more and more connections together, and that way that community grows? Because reading is a hard habit. Not everyone is going to read, right? So it's how do you keep growing that community and connect readers many different ways. The pandemic showed us that those connections can be done, and that's why we set up the reading challenge. It was small in the pandemic because people were just tired of all that content that was on Zoom after a bit. But after the pandemic, that's grown hugely. Last year, we had about 600 teams from from about 400 schools that registered for the reading challenge. Of the 600 teams, we had some 400 and something that were competitive teams, and around 200 and something that were non-competitive teams. So each team for us in the reading challenge has to have 3 kids in there. So if you want to be non-competitive, you can participate, but you won't compete. And
are there a big portion of people who do that as well, like not compete and participate?
Yeah, like 200 teams.
Oh wow,
200 teams that were non-competitive, and there are kids who say that, look, I want to be part of it, I want to join all the sessions, but I don't want to compete, and that's absolutely fine. So we do 30 books over 3 months.
Okay.
Which is a heavy piece of reading.
30 books over 3 months.
Over 3 months,
wow.
From grade 4 to 7. And these are things we've always done in Neev.
Okay.
Even now, we do this grade 4 to 7, which is a public challenge where our children also participate. But we also do a grade 1 startup reading thing. We do a grade 2 and 3 challenge. We also do a grade 8 and 9 challenge at Neev. But the grade 4 to 7 is that public challenge, because grade 4 to 7 is that magical point at which if you can keep children reading through that journey, it's likely that, and research shows that if you get them to grade 8 while continuing reading, the chances are they will get to the more complex reading themselves. So there are these walls that exist. Marion Wolf calls grade 4 the Maginot line. It's that last line of push in that battle where the last line of resistance. You give them
terminal velocity, right? By them to continue.
Exactly. So grade 4 is that line. And even our NEP talks about grade 3 being that point baseline, where kids have to reach the right reading level, and they'll be fine for the next few years. When you cross that grade 7 barrier, you're fine all the way through college. That's when you can start accessing more complex texts like reading The Economist or, reading those big heavy pieces in the Atlantic and all of that. You'll be able to do that. So how to keep kids in that range reading is what we are working. So these 30 books over 3 months is a heavy read, but you can join it uncompetitive and you can
how does the challenge really work
on that?
For the people who are listening and don't know what a reading challenge looks like?
We just we have there's a suggested schedule of reading. We also have a lot of online stuff with this. So from the 30 writers, we send out word to all the 30 writers to see which of the writers want to do online sessions with kids, and we end up having 800 or 900 kids signing up. Not just the teams, not all the teams, but 800, 900 kids signing up for each one of those online sessions with writers from around the world, from India or from elsewhere that sign up. So we keep this calendar of reading, because that's the only way kids are going to get through those 30 books, right? So we keep this calendar of reading. We send out prompts. School librarians are part of this, so we send suggested activities that they can do. We finally have at about 20 books, we have an elimination round. And then the last 10 books are that last run-up that happens. So there's a schedule. There's a schedule and there's a structure.
So how do you progress if you've read?
But kids who are readers, they get through. And we don't even insist on all the children reading all the 30 books. Because so long as one person in that team has read the book, it's fine.
So if it's 3 people team, on an average, you're looking at 10 books per person.
But readers don't do that.
All of them will read it.
Many of them will read all the books.
How do you assess whether the reading is done or not done?
They're questions. We have a quiz.
Okay.
At the
it's
end,
a live quiz or it's a self-modulated quiz?
At the end, we have, at the very end, we have a live quiz, and we are looking at how to grow that a little bit bigger, because we have 4 teams from around the country that we sponsor.
Oh, wow.
This time, in the Lit Fest was the first time that a Neev team was not in those 4 teams. It was a bit hard for us.
But also proud, probably.
We are fair. We are completely fair. And if our teams did not make it to the top 4, then they weren't there in that, right? So I think we also insist that each team there will only be one team from a school that will come up, so that makes it further harder. It also is to ensure that there's no cheating, because if everybody from one place is winning, that that kind of tells you worrisome stuff. It builds honesty into the system, and we don't charge anything. It's a free of cost challenge. We run this completely free of cost. We curate really good reading. Our sessions are fabulous online. The writers love it. It also often becomes an introduction to a fabulous writer to what we are doing here at the NLF, and then a couple of years later, those writers will come to the festival physically because they've enjoyed that session so much. And the questions that kids can ask live questions. Kids send question ahead to us, and kids love it when we put their question up or we put their picture up and their question. They love that happening. So there are lots of kids that are racing to be the first one to log in and send their question in. So it's just lovely to see that enthusiasm. And I think that has allowed us. We've seen teams signing up from Pakistan, from Tajikistan, from all kinds of places as well. So it's gone international as well. We have teams from the US.
And they just found you guys, or you guys had to do some marketing around it?
Reading is a community. They look for community. Wow. Readers look for community, and they find themselves. They find more people like them. So building more bridges in reading is always our goal. So that the reading challenge is really hard for us to do, because unlike the festival, which happens over 3 days and is fabulous, it's such a big celebration of reading, having 70, 80 writers in one place. But the reading challenge is harder for us to do, because that happens over a few months, and then the quizzes and elimination, and our curation of books starts even before that. We start partnering with bookstores to say that you need to make sure you have enough stock available. The first time we went big with this, suddenly there were bookstores that were writing to us saying that
please
you
give
guys
us a notice of what you're selecting.
You guys, can you please tell your parents from your reading challenge to lay off, because
really?
because they are haranguing us for the books, and we hadn't thought of that.
Yeah,
because
true.
we don't get anything out of it. So it's just bookstores have to. So we now send advance notice to bookstores so that
please
they can
stock up on these.
Stock up on those titles. We also look at books that are more likely to also be around more easily, so that that's available as well. But kids also read on Kindles today, so they also have that available. Libraries, we'll send advance notice to schools as well of the books, so because then libraries can put in 4 sets, 5 sets of the books, and they're all usually very good books. So they're nice for kids to, whenever anyone asks us for book recommendations, I always give them the last few reading challenges. And, internally we do reading challenges for younger and older kids as well, right? So we always give them the last few reading challenges, and we say, these are great books. If your child hasn't read them, they're great ones to read. So I think it's, so we do all of that. And then we try to keep it fair, but we still run into trouble. Last year, we ran into a lot of trouble with AI use.
People reading the summaries of the books and answering quizzes?
A lot of, we were seeing, some ugly stuff. I don't want to talk about it, but I think it's some ugly stuff in there. And so I think it's, and then we saw a lot of internet posts also about all of this, about us then tightening the norms when we saw all of this happening. And we don't like to, it's a non-profit thing for us. We're not making any money. So we didn't want to go in and deal with all of that. But AI does that too with you, right? So I think reading is like this big skill that we see, and we see that with our children in school, that kids who grow to be voracious readers are best placed for, and they also achieve high scores. Yeah. So if I look at our child last year in the last graduated cohort, who was a 45, voracious reader, and reads widely because he was very much into computational math, read hugely on, when he would talk about the books that he reads, I didn't understand what he was saying, because, physics and math and computers and all of that kind of coming in, and, it was not just Alan Turing and things like that. It was much, much more than that he had in there. So I think it's, I think reading is one of those habits. It's a hard habit, which is hard to sustain. But if you can sustain it, it's the only skill that in an ever-changing world can place you at that great intersection of progressing ahead. Reading is the knife, is the sword, is the sword in a knife fight, if you want to say, that the kids will have, and it's an unfair advantage. In the world of AI, even more so. Yeah. It's an unfair advantage for people who read. So how to ensure more kids are out there who perceive reading to be cool. And that's how we see it. We give away medals, we give away stickers, we give away all of that, because even if a child reads one more book, it's fabulous. It's great that you're reading more. So I think it's...
So the Lit Fest sounds like it's a celebration and recognition and reward for people who have got into that mindset of reading. As a school, if I'm thinking, what can I do to inculcate that habit of getting my children to read more? What can we do?
So I think early on, up to grade 3, or, NEP defines grade 3, Marian Wolf says grade 4 as the Maginot line. Up to grade 3 or 4, build the skills very logically, because if the kids don't have the skills to keep up with reading, so, build the skills very systematically. Start early, build the skills so that the kids can stay at the right stage. Don't fast forward. We always say, kids reading the entire Harry Potter series in grade 2, that's a problem, because they will not understand anything that is in those books. So I think it's, you can probably understand Harry Potter 1, but that's it. Yeah. Not 2, not 3. For Prisoner of Azkaban, just think of that, Dementors and what they mean. So I think that's very worrisome. Fast forwarding also chapter books is a problem. Stay with the stages of readings, see where your child is, and grow that child logically. So teach the skills till grade 3, grade 4, very consistently, very scientifically, and that's where the scientific processes of teaching also come in. It's at grade 4 that we switch at Neev. Up till grade 4, the reading and writing is at max in balance. In a grade 1 and 2 class, it's not even at balance. Actually, there's more time spent reading than writing, right? So, but that doesn't happen in our schools. It's actually, we're only writing. We're not spending time reading. If there's reading, it goes home, right? So how do you, we always say that if you're going to spend 5 hours writing in our grade 1 and 2 class, you're going to spend 10 hours reading. And that reading comes in many different forms. In school.
Which is where I think the major miss is, right? People, you said, reading gets sent home or is assumed that it will be done.
So if you think about a grade 6 child who can't read, right? Now social studies and sciences, all of that is kicking in. What is that child going to do? That child is going to get left behind, right? The only thing you can do is slow it down, change the timetable and say, let's figure out why you can't read. Let's unblock it. Let's make sure you can read and fast forward some of that and let you read so much that you can come up to grade level, then put all those subjects back. But are we willing to do that with timetables? We are not, right? In the US now, you have reading laws, and that's a bit harsh. I think there are 18 or 22 states that are signatory to these reading laws, which means if a child is not at reading level, you'll hold the child back, which is harsh. But I think those are they have those reading laws. These are all very recent, They were first proposed, they came up in 2013, 14, and in 2000, even pre-pandemic, many states were signing up. Post-pandemic, many more states have signed up. But in India, we are not doing anything with reading in our schools. We don't, and every teacher can teach how to read, right? Yeah. Because most teachers can read. So how do you build reading into that curriculum? For us, it's only in grade 4 that switch point happens, that in grade 4, it becomes equal. For every 5 hours of writing that you're doing 5 hours of reading in school for that. And those are mentor texts, there's casual reading, there's drop everything and read. There's so many reading routines that we have in school. So it's equal. And then from there, it proceeds. Later on, by grade 7, also, it goes down a little bit. And then it's only much later where reading can then go home, because now the kids are caught up with the skill, and then they can, they can.
So these early years or till grade 4 or 6th, you're saying?
Up to grade 4, it needs to be equal.
Equal reading and writing.
Yeah, before grade 4, grade 3, reading and writing needs to be equal. Okay. We do our reading and writing.
When is reading more than writing? In what grades?
Grade 1, grade 2. Okay. Reading is kindergarten.
Yeah. Okay.
Reading has to be much more.
Because your motor skills are still not developed at that time.
It's not about motor skills.
Okay.
It's about...
just paying attention to that aspect more.
We teach writing through the grammar method.
Okay.
Right? Which is, we'll teach you punctuation, we'll teach you all that. We'll shut the child down. Yeah. The child will figure out punctuation if the child is reading, So I think they'll know where to pause. And then when they reread their piece, they'll know exactly where to put the punctuation. Yeah. So I think it's through that you learn grammar. It's through that you enrich vocabulary. It's through that you start to read harder and harder patterns. So I think it's all of that process. It's through that you start to recognize complex language structure. You know, a person who can read an economist article and who can't read an economist article is a thing, right? And we see that even with the high schoolers because we do a lot of reading even in grade 11 and 12. So kids who resist that reading, we can see that, and then how to get them to break through that is a requirement. So I think enriching reading to make them good writers, to make them good arguers, to build conversational intelligence. It's all about reading more, discussing it, writing. So it's always about that.
I feel that even like I'll speak as a parent.
There's another skill which is not talked about much in our schools. We've become very popular with all these MUNs and all that. We don't talk about debate anymore in schools. Debate is another hard skill.
Yeah.
We don't, and debate requires knowledge. MUN does not necessarily require knowledge. You can go to an MUN, you can keep putting up cards. Yeah, you can use knowledge as well, but very few kids do. And you can keep putting these cards up and you can get through the MUN. You can even get certificates at the end of it and they mean nothing.
Yeah.
But debate, if you go in for a debate, a minimum of a 7-minute argument, you're going to have to put up.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
So
as adults, it can be hard. So kids doing it could be...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So debate is the other skill. But debate requires knowledge.
Yes.
Knowledge requires reading.
So it becomes
we're coming
foundational
back.
again.
So how do you build that trajectory? So at Neev, we look at that. We look at reading as a core skill. Debate comes in pretty quickly, and arguments and debating skills come in very quickly as well. And the kids that get better at debate are the ones who are deep readers and who access not just books but also they don't read in shorts. They read deep newspaper articles and things like that. So I think it's those two are the two big skills which I think our kids today need.
I speak as a
How
parent.
can you feed that?
I speak
more?
as a parent. I started reading very late. Like I think after college is probably I read my first non-fiction book or non-textual book that it's not required for coursework, so to speak. That sort of gap that I felt later on, because I now enjoy reading. So for my kids, I always wanted them to pick this skill, if you may, early on. And it's hard for to get your kids to do that on a daily basis, build that skill, build that habit, like you said. So what can us as parents do to encourage more of that even at home? Because not every school is going to dedicate that much time that you're going to have dedicated time of reading in schools. So what can parents do?
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do at home with that. I think it's we always say that a child becomes a reader on the lap of a parent, and I think it's that when they know that reading relationship is so deeply and emotionally embedded inside them, my kids I read aloud to them until they were in high school. And even now, when they come back, sometimes we do read alouds, and we have this whole corner of picture books, and we go to the picture books and we pick out our favorite picture books and we read picture books to each other. So I think it's it's emotional. For us, that relationship is more than the act of reading. It's emotional. The stories are embedded in there. I think it's, so reading frequently, building shelves of books that are good, tracking reading habits, reading just ahead of the reading capability of your child, not making your child read it, but reading aloud to the child at that time. The read alouds never go away. Yeah. So people think that you stop reading aloud to your child once your child starts reading, right? But no, you step up your reading and you go to the next level and you now start reading that and discussing that. So the child, once in a way you turn that book towards your child and say, hey, why don't you read this paragraph to me? And that's how you build the skill further as well. So there's a lot that parents can do with all of that, and upholding the habit of reading, creating reading routines at home. Parents tell us that, I just can't read a book. I said, then that's a problem, because
you have to buy into it as well.
You find a place for reading, and you read anything you want, create your own bookshelf, allow your child to create their own bookshelf. Don't get stuck to the same formulaic stuff yourself. And if your child is getting stuck to the formulaic stuff, question that as well. So celebrate reading. For us at home, reading was always wall space was always a fight. Art and reading and books was always a fight for us. Have bedside tables, have baskets of books lying in places and attractively. Weed out the books which are not being read constantly, and do that as a collective family activity. Pile them up and say, what are the books we're not going to read and why. When you browse through books, you sometimes start liking a book. So I think it's how do you do more and more with reading. I think it's that there's a research that shows that even if you carry a book around, you're more likely to make a child want to read that if that child admires you as or likes, or you're a parent and the child respects you, or as an educator, if you carry a book around, the child is more likely to at least be curious about it and say, hey, what's in that book, can I read it? So I think it is, you can role model it, you can embrace it, you can read aloud constantly, you can bring reading in many different forms. As children grow, start looking at what their reading interests are and build more stuff on that. My son reads a lot of history and reads a lot of politics, reads a lot of mountaineering books for some reason. My daughter reads completely different stuff, but she listens to him when he recommends. So she doesn't like his politics books or history books, but she liked his mountaineering books. So now on a family group, she's asking him for more mountaineering books. She read Into Thin Air and she loved it. Yeah. So now she's saying, okay, what next? She won't go as deep as him into the mountaineering books because she has her own reading choices as well. So I think create room for those conversations, basically. Be also willing to read books that your children recommend to you. I remember a book appearing on my bedside table with my son saying that, I read Phantom Tollbooth and I just love it, Mama, you're going to have to read it. And so I said, okay, fine, I'll read it, and it was a quick read, so I read it. Then there was Dalai Lama's cat that appeared on my bedside table. And I think he hadn't read it either, but he just wanted to see if I'll read it or not. And then I had to force myself to read it just because it was his recommendation, So also, if you want children to be reading what you are recommending, be also willing to have the reverse of that relationship. Read what they recommend to you or what they like. So I think it's always that. Kids also get to this place where they start reading dark stuff. And we always advise parents that it's at that point, it's good to know what your child is reading. So read with them. Again, go in there and read what's in those books. Because if you're willing to have a discussion after reading versus just putting up bans. We always say, don't ban. Don't, but also be thoughtful about it. Don't just not ban, because if your child is reading the wrong stuff, you're going to have to tell the child that don't read that. Some guidance needs to be there in that. So I think, it's reading is a relationship. Yeah. There is so much that you can do with reading, starting early and then building it up. We also say that people who have had the choice to read and have chosen not to be readers will unlikely become readers. But people who have not had the choice to read and have not had books around them, they might become readers later in life as well by finding the right book.
Maybe I'm on the second side of that.
Yeah, so it's all about that. So, for me, a moment of reading, is it John Wood? Or something, the Room to Read, the book, the Microsoft guy. The Room to Read, that book, I don't remember, Wood, something Wood. He spoke about how he went to this library in Nepal in a school and he saw that there were no books there. And that book was very influential for me because he then writes to his mum in the US or UK or US, and he says that this library has no books. All my childhood books are lying there. Can you just ship them over here and I'll build a library here? And then he tells his mother to write to all the friends and collect more boxes and boxes of books in their basement so he can put it in more libraries like that. And that's how the Room to Read movement was born. Wow. When I read that book, I realized that I didn't have many childhood books. I didn't have picture books in my life. Why did I not have picture books in my life, right? So that choice was not presented early to me, but it emerged in my life. So it's how can we create those opportunities early? And even if you've not created them early, can you question that at that point so that you have the choice of being a reader.
Yeah.
So I think it's that. And we always say that, I mean, build more community around reading, build book clubs, build book exchanges and things like that. Go to a party and exchange an old book instead of that. Lay the books out and see which book a child becomes curious, or an adult for that matter becomes curious about. So we'll often do that. We'll put lots of books on tabletops and we'll say that pick a book, any book. Any book that appeals to you, or recommend a book to somebody. And kids will often read a book, or adults will read a book that someone has recommended to them. They'll at least have a go at that. Even if you say I'm a non-reader, people will say things like, because you recommended that book, I read it, and and that's a good thing. A science head read a book by Surfing the Shallows recently, and I thought that was so interesting, and she attributed it to me. I said, well, you did it yourself. Yeah, I recommended it to you, but it's lovely that you did the hard work of wanting to read that over your break. So it's lovely that you can nudge reading in so many different ways, and it comes alive.
That's awesome. No, I think I was really inspired by emphasis on reading, because that's something that, like I was saying, I value for my kids, and I would love for them to be more readers. I see a little bit picking on them, but
the gun in the knife fight is what reading is.
Exactly. So, I hope more people get inspired for encouraging reading in schools and in their homes. And I think that's what you're championing for as well. I mean, we were already reading at Neev a lot. We wanted to take it beyond our walls as well. We could have also done the Lit Fest just for our own children, but and even today, half the crowd that comes to our Lit Fest is Neev children, and half the crowd the other half is people not just from Bangalore but also from other parts of India that end up coming in. We wanted to take the culture of reading beyond our walls. We thought it was also important to do that, to make reading cool. But now other ways of doing this, online reading challenge, things like that, are new ways of doing that as well. And it gets more scale that way, more impact, because more people can widely participate.
We are just looking at making it more and more cool. That's basically what our goal is.
In this initiative of building the culture of reading and failed, or so something that you tried and didn't work out and you had to rethink?
I mean, we just believe in hanging in there and making things work. So that's what we do. Something in reading that's not worked for us is making adults read.
Okay.
Has not worked because...
You mean teachers or parents?
Both teachers and parents. If you have had the chance to read and you've chosen to not be a reader, it's hard to make you a reader. So we're constantly working at it, but that's hard. So that's something that we've not been particularly successful with. But I think reading is cool at Neev. So anyone who's at Neev, a teacher or a parent, they will read. Is that part of the filtration test of, like, you make it to Neev only when you're when you have love for reading? No, reading adults are such a small community that we cannot possibly set that as a filter. Reading children at Neev is a different story, but reading adults is not a filter that we can set. I mean, I think building. So it's not about failing, right? When you don't succeed with something, you reimagine and you try something different. So that's what we've always done. So the way we imagined our reading program growing from kindergarten into the primary years was different from the way it is today.
Okay. So there were learnings along the way. Something didn't work, and then you optimized it further.
We threw a lot of very challenging books for reading, and then we broke them down for kids, and we made sure that they were reading them. But the connection between reading and writing was lost.
Okay.
Right. So it's you read just a little bit ahead of where you are, and then you bring that into your writing, and then you keep moving that scale forward. Reading and writing, we call them the misunderstood twins. Okay. So and then debate comes in as the third triplet in that relationship. So we were not successful with that because reading was a separate program, writing was a separate program.
True.
And then we had mentor texts for the writing.
Okay.
How to bring all of that, and read alouds were a completely different thing. When we aligned all of that is when it started to make sense, because now the reading was feeding the writing. Later the reading, as the kids grow up, the reading starts feeding the research. So, and then feeding the writing, right? So building that connectivity is what helped us make that a solid program. So today we can see the connection very clearly between reading and writing, reading, research and writing, debate, reading, research. So we can see those connections clearly, but we had to reimagine that, because what we thought were the novels we wanted our kids to be reading were too high level for the kids to bring it to writing. So some of the reading books that we read for as mentor texts are actually even lower than the reading level of a child, because we assess the reading level. We always test it. So the kids, the borrowing from the library is sometimes a higher level than the reading level that they are using for the reading and writing program. So that was it was very hard, because we also had favorite books in there. So to give those books away and say that, we're not going to do those books. It was like this big aspiration. It was like, prove the point, our children can read this book. To walk away from that and say we will be going with simpler books. We will also be bringing picture books in older grades. So those were some hard decisions.
No, that's a great learning
but
for a lot of people trying to
reimagining,
start out.
how to not speed up
Yeah.
on chapter books, how to not take away picture books too early. There are picture books that are great for adults.
Yeah.
So I think it's, how do you balance that to ensure that there's, you engage stuff. I think the other thing was that books that engaged only one of us were not good enough. Looking at a variety of books to ensure there was something for boys, something for girls, but you were still not gendering the books too much, because we're a co-ed school. So I think ensuring that you have a diverse program which is at the right level with a lot of diversity. We also started realizing that having Indian children's literature was important in there, because when children would write realistic fiction, they would use Indian names and Indian places. But when they would write imaginative fiction, creative writing, stories, imaginary writings, suddenly there would
will come in play.
Places in the US and Europe, and names suddenly, and it
That's
would
a very
suddenly be
interesting, like a hack on
they would suddenly be
psychology of
Sharon and
thinking.
Steve instead of Sudesh and Kalpana or something like that. So I think we are always, and we are observing that always, and we are questioning that. So right now we are seeing an emergence of that again in our PYP.
Okay.
That again this is happening. So we are questioning that do we either need to bring in more Indian reading, but Indian children's literature is very limited even now. So, or do we take away some forms of writing from there, because those are given to going towards these imaginary worlds, and they think imaginary worlds are elsewhere. I don't know. So I think it's, so we are always balancing the reading, writing, genres, titles, levels, variety, all of that. I think also that having a writer speak with you is just a fabulous experience.
Of course.
So for children to, it's someone who's on the binder of a book and is jumping off and becoming a live person. It's so inspiring.
And then all suddenly when you're reading, their actual voice starts to go in your ears as well, right?
Exactly.
And that adds
And
so
you-
much more,
you-
like experientially, it enhances your experience to read
Exactly,
the book incredibly.
exactly. So I think we also try to keep a balance of all of that. The
Very
writers
cool.
that we can invite in. And it's amazing to see that even writers from around the world, we will write to them. And if we want an author session online, they'll be happy to do it.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
So I think and we'll usually ask for 20 minutes or something like that. And anyone is willing to pull out 20 minutes for an online
But,
session.
you said very important thing, and I think that's somewhere in the core of Neev as well, is talking about that, when they're doing imagination, if they're thinking outside of India or, Western world or whatever.
It's troubling.
So you're talking about identity here.
Yeah.
Right? And you have a very strong thought
Focus on
and
identity.
focus on identity.
And that's why it's troubling.
Yes.
That's exactly why it's troubling.
So talk to us a little bit more about this identity aspect.
Now you're not thinking anymore that adventure is something that happens somewhere else.
It's
but
only
you're
for the
thinking-
Western world.
But you're thinking an imaginary story is something that happens in the Western world, but not in my world. So I think realistic fiction happens in my world, but imaginary fantasy fiction happens in some other part of the world. So how do you... and that's troubling, right? Because then you're still thinking scones and hot chocolate.
Yeah.
Those midnight feasts and things
Yeah.
like that, right? So it's in those British novels, Enid Blyton
and even shows and all that.
all of that you would have. So I think we've come a long way from that, but even this is troubling for us, because what in your identity, and we don't want to go drill down and say, no, chalo, only read Indian literature, because we know that in the world of global literature, Indian literature certainly has its place, but it's still limited.
Yeah.
It's limited just in sheer numbers
Yeah.
itself. So I think it's so that you have to balance that. So we're not going to limit that, and we're going to say now only read Indian literature. That's not even possible. Indian literature is often not even scaled according to grading, grade levels and word choices and reading patterns and things like that, which global literature is. So many of those things also become hard. But we always balance all of that, and we are questioning all of this, because if there are confused identities in there, that's something that's always troubling us.
How do you become intentional about establishing that identity for your students?
You don't establish identity. You discover identity. You look at language, and you look at the. We also do a language day at Neev, which is a huge event. So we have all our parents come together, and it's a parent-run event. They are in school for a month. They are teaching them about, and we insist on a piece of literature at the core of it all. I'm in the Marwadi group, and then there are others in other groups. So we have many different languages. We also have a German group. We also have a British group that wanted to do English, not Indian English. So I think it's, so all of this, and it becomes a big celebration of song, dance, culture, reading. People from that culture get put up, traditions from those cultures, how literacy is first taught through the rice alphabet or through choosing some things, things like that. So all of that also gets brought in here. We started that in 2017 or so, and it felt like, and the first time we suddenly saw clothes changing completely for that, and it felt like identity today, it felt like needs legitimization almost. So we do that every year, and it's a fabulous event, and our kids love it. Our parents now stock up stuff to use for Language Day, because they know that Language Day is going to come, and and I think it's...
is that sort of like a flagship event for the identity aspect?
It is. So we have 5 or 6 events around the school. LitFest is clearly one of them. We have another one, which is the science thing, which is Eureka, which is an in-school event. Language Day is another one, which is an in-school event. We have Sarvajit Divas, which is a sports day. And then there are a couple of others. So we have these 5 or 6 events, which are these big culture building kind of events. They're anchors or pillars of culture building, and they celebrate an aspect of culture in there. Language Day is like that for us. What I wanted to mention was that sometimes, like post-pandemic particularly, people, a lot of our parents started backing off from Language Day, and they wouldn't volunteer. And Language Day can only be successful if a lot of parents are volunteering. We came to a place where it was dwindling over the years, and we were still managing by teachers coming in. But teachers can't do this. It's parents who have to come in into this. And we came to a place last year where we had such a low volunteering list that we had no choice but to cancel Language Day. And that was like a furor. And but we knew that we can do it soon after, and we didn't say that. It came up soon after, and volunteering went up again. So sometimes I think it's important to also draw a line, and something that's not working, you pull back. We were feeling like we were failing with Language Day, and do we need to get rid of Language Day? But it was just that. Parents thought that, you'll manage to do it as a school anyway, but we can't manage to do it as a school. When we said that, look, we can't manage to do it as a school, that's when the next time, just a couple of months later, we did Language Day in the start of this academic year instead of the end of the last academic year, and volunteers went up hugely. It was lovely to see that happen. I know it's hard for parents to volunteer and then come in for 2 hours every day for a continuous period of a few weeks, but they do it, and that's what brings this. It's lovely to see, because when you talk to children and you say, "Oh wow, you did really well with that dance," and that, it was so nice to see that, and they just shrug their shoulders and say, "Oh, we do that." So it's that's what we do. We're at Neev, we do Language Day. So it's just a part of that. Just like they do sports, just like they do science, just like they do reading.
Almost like normalizing it in a way.
It's part of even in the online mode, we did not get rid of Language Day. It was an important part, and the younger kids told us at that point that can't we do more of this? do much more of this, because it's so nice. I'm
Yeah.
Goan, and I'm talking in my language. I'm talking about my food. Suddenly, my grandparents are attractive people
Yeah.
with all the routines that they have. So I think all of that is just lovely to see, and that's what we see with Language Day. We have grandparents, we have uncles, aunts. So all of them coming in. Family is what we insist, because even with that, it's like a 3,000 people event
I'm sure.
at the school, and it's just fabulous.
So, you bring in and, another.
And it's not different from what a UWC or someone would do, right? They do the international day,
International
right?
movement, yeah.
We are in India,
Yeah.
and our cultures are
We've got
so
such diversity and
right,
culture in one
so
country.
right. So we have a child who's Nepali, and there's a child who's from Rajasthan. There's a
Yeah.
child from somewhere else, and and that feeds choices.
Yeah.
So one of our children did a project, her personal project, which is a Grade 10 project last year, a fabulous piece of work on Kavod.
Yeah.
And the Kavod box, and somewhere some memory got stirred up for her, and she's a very engineering oriented girl, but some memory got stirred up with the Rajasthan trip that we do,
Yeah.
that Kavads, and my grandfather used to have a Kavad, but the Kavad did not come to my part of the family, it went to the other part of the family.
Oh, wow.
Where's the Kavad gone? I want my own Kavad. Somewhere that connection happened, and she built her own Kavad. She built a book on Kavad literature, and and that was her
Wow.
personal project. And she did so well with that. She went to Rajasthan and she learned how to build Kavad from one of the only people who's left that builds Kavad boxes now, and I think that's identity.
Yes, absolutely.
Very deeply embedded. I think it's just so beautiful to see something like that happen. But I think it's, your choices get driven by some of those things that you get exposed to. So the fact that you have Language Day, the fact that you have a trip to Rajasthan, suddenly all those connections made sense to her, saying, hey, we didn't get the Kavad. Let's go and make sense out of what is the Kavad,
And I think
let's
it brings
understand
agency among the students as well, that initiative
Motivation.
taking. And
It's motivation.
Yeah.
You don't build agency in children. And, a lot of people say that, how do you build agency in children?
Yeah.
Right? You can't build agency.
Why not?
You can be agentic
Okay.
as a human.
You can be an enabler in it.
Can I build agency in you? Why are you dumping children down?
Yeah.
Why are you saying that you give them the opportunity to exercise agency.
Yeah.
You don't build agency in children.
True.
You constantly create the opportunity for them to make choices from which they will exercise agency, which is also innate.
Very
Agency
true.
is one of those weird words, right?
Yeah.
It's like motivation. What is
Yeah.
agency? How do you break it down?
Yeah.
It's the choices you're
Choices.
making, actions that you're taking. Do you need to be taught that?
No, it comes from within.
It's somewhere within you.
Yeah.
We've labeled that and we've made that another word that we think we can teach you.
Yeah.
It's not. I get very troubled when people say that, I'm going to build agency in children. It's inherent.
Yeah. You can help them
Learners
discover
are-
it, is what you're saying.
Learners are agentic, providing the canvas in which to exercise agency. Nurturing many different is the fox and the hedgehog.
Okay.
Isaiah Berlin's, right? That there are many different opportunities. You don't know what you're going to discover about yourself, because human capability is so huge.
Yeah.
And human, there is a baby is not unconscious. A baby's mind is not lacking consciousness, right? When does human consciousness start? Is always a question that
Yeah.
we can never answer,
Yeah.
because we can't go earlier than the baby.
Yes.
Right? But human consciousness exists. How does it exist? Piaget talks about constructivism,
Yeah.
and that's held over time, right?
Yeah.
So you're constructing knowledge, but there is some theory that exists in your brain already
Yeah.
that you're building knowledge on further.
Yeah.
So you don't build agency, you exercise agency is the right way. So I think, school founders should say, we give children the opportunity to exercise agency
agency.
many different ways,
Yeah.
from trying a million different
That's
things.
true flexibility that you can give to a child, is it? Or it's not even flexibility?
It's creating opportunities for
Okay.
learning. It's creating many different kinds of projects.
Okay.
It's creating many different kinds of learning opportunities. It's creating many, field trips.
Yeah.
It's the learning journeys. It's we go across India. It's books and
Yeah.
reading. Reading is the best form of travel, because you're traveling without actually traveling anywhere. It's the cheapest form of
Yeah.
travel. So it's many of those things. We bring a lot of guest lectures in. you don't know what is going to float the boat for a child, So what clicks to a child, when, where? You try many things. We always tell our parents also to try many things, but not mindlessly. Don't just keep and don't let them keep switching out from classes as well, because don't enroll them for too many classes. Don't switch out too easily, because that reduces resilience.
Yes.
Then, right? So it's how do you balance all of that, but be observing all the time. What are the chances that children are going to carry? One thing that we've also figured out is that we have switched completely to Western performing arts.
Yeah.
Right? Why? I don't understand that, because the Indian performing arts are very, very rich. How do you bring much more of that into children's choices? Our children do the exams and they do the, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 exam, grade 5 exam, and they stop. Why?
Yeah.
Because colleges look at least a grade 5
We're
exam.
just trying to check boxes on a
You're
certain
check
type.
boxing, right? And that's not going to become part of your identity.
Yeah.
Versus if there's a piece of dance or a piece of music that speaks to some other aspect of identity in you or in your culture somewhere, the chances are it's going to stay with you for life.
Absolutely.
Right? At Neev, one of the other things we do is we offer the Indian arts and the Western arts in balance.
You choose.
In the 9 offerings that we have for the performing arts, 2 of them are Western forms, and the remaining 7 are Indian forms. We have Kalaripayattu, we have Bharatnatyam, we have Kathak, we have Tabla, we have Bansuri, we've got violin, we've got all of this. So this is all offered to the children, and the children make a choice. They build skills in that. They'll take it with them somewhere. It'll stay with them. They won't necessarily do exams in them, but they perform using all of that, and that's lovely to see.
Absolutely, and it goes back to being progressive is not about just adopting the Western ways.
Being modern is not about being Western.
Yes,
we often make that mistake.
Exactly.
With all this stuff that we do, and some of the stuff we only started doing post-pandemic. So like this Indian art forms focus, because we realized that the Western art form goes out of children's life. Once they come to the high school years, they say, now I have to study, so forget all of this stuff. But when they have Kathak, and the Kathak kind of suddenly speaks to somebody, there's a group of kids that have gone into high school now, and they are saying that, no, I want to continue the Kathak in my life, and I enjoy that. So we've continued that with the kids a little bit longer. We'll keep it there. And they'll continue that other ways outside of school when they go on. So we brought that in post-pandemic because we felt that need to give these multiple choices and let children make those choices, and that's hard because the number of people that we have doing all those art forms are just so huge. To bring that chaos to a structure, we're still working with that. But that's been a 4-year project for us. This is our 4th year, and the other 3 years we were doing both in parallel. It's the first year that we actually made it a choice because we felt that we were ready and our community was ready. Last year, at the end of the year, a lot of grandparents who came for this celebration performance that we have, Neev at the end of the year, another pillar event, which is like a celebration of creativity. A lot of grandparents were saying to us that I've been telling my children that don't teach your child the piano. Why don't you teach your child tabla, or why don't you teach your child Bharatnatyam or whatever, And I think it's and my child was not listening to me, but now my grandchild is wanting to do that, and it's so lovely that you're doing that. So we decided to take that risk this year, and we made it a mainstream offering. And we said, we're combining it all, and we're offering it to you. We were still scared that most of our kids are going to go to guitar and piano, but they didn't. We actually had a fair distribution of all of them across all of the things. And, we didn't have tabla until last year. Suddenly tabla also came in this year, but lots of kids that took it up as well. So I think it's lovely to see how many different sources of identity you can have, no?
I want to switch gears to parents that, the type of parents, let's call it, you attract at Neev or any school does.
Nice.
Because, a lot of the initiatives that you're doing, they can be progressive, they can be something very core and valuable to you. How do you attract parents who buy into that value? Otherwise, you're always going to have that conflict between parents' expectation and what the school's values are. So how did you manage that?
So our parents join us in when the kids are really young, right? So we say 18 months to 18 years. our IB head likes to say, from diapers to DP is what our IB head,
Nice.
DP head likes to say.
Yeah.
So we have kids joining us young, and we see that alignment.
Yeah.
People who don't align with the values of who we are usually choose other options
Yeah.
along the way. It's just a natural alignment that happens over a period of time. If people are entering us in a later grade, we have conversations to see whether they align with the routines that we have. Many of these routines are also very hard-coded and very evident. So we do walks, we do those tours that I was
Yeah.
telling you about. So parents walk around, they look at all of this. Most parents... So we have a very special community at Neev, and a lot of them are entrepreneurs, change makers of various sort. We have scholars, we have researchers, we have designers. So it's a very eclectic parent community.
Yeah.
Most of them,
Open-minded is what
most
I'm
of them are
thinking.
educated in different parts of the world
Okay.
at great universities and
Yeah.
colleges. There are some who are not. They are purely homegrown and not with that many opportunities. But they recognize this as a core part of, the Western world prioritizes all of this, right?
Yeah.
You prioritize the arts that belong in your heritage. You prioritize religion. We don't talk about
Yeah,
religion
yeah.
at all. Why do we not talk about religion?
It's taboo. It's
Religion
conflict.
but that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? Because if we don't talk about religion, then you leave what Jonathan Haidt calls a God-shaped hole
Yeah.
in our children's brains,
Yeah.
right? So you've got to talk about religion as well. You've got to talk about prayers. You've got to talk about... So there is so much that you have to build in with children, which and I think our parent community appreciates that. Often when we do these learning journeys across the country, there are school heads who ask me that, how do you manage this? Don't your parents object? Because we'll go to Gujarat, Run of
Yeah.
Kutch and places like that. You don't have bathrooms in many places,
Yeah.
And our kids do fine
Yeah.
with all of that. So it's... sometimes we'll have this situation where, and we'll just sit down wherever we are,
Yeah.
on a railway station
Yeah.
or an airport or wherever, and if there's some learning discussion that has to happen, it'll happen. We'll
Yeah.
get into circle and we'll talk about it. Sometimes we'll have a parent who'll say, oh, the teachers were making the children sit on the floor on the airport. And I said, we always have to tell the parent, that's not a bug, that's a feature. Because we are letting the children see the real
Truly
India.
grounding experience.
It's not about grounding for us, it's the place you have there.
Yeah.
You don't have a table and a chair, you'll sit here and you will still learn.
Yeah.
You don't stop learning, right? So I think that's what you do. So I think it's learning in many different contexts for children. They start to realize that we are learning even in those opportunities, and they start to realize, we have sanitized learning for our children,
Yeah.
right? That they go to their homes and they have tutors and they learn from those tutors. They get into the air-conditioned cars and they go to school, and they get out of school, they walk in and they worry about the smell outside, and then they go into
It's a
schools.
bubble.
So it's a bubble, right? But it's a very porous bubble for our
Okay.
children because they can see the world around outside. So unless they bring that into their learning, unless they know who else is in their community and who's in their neighborhood, are you truly educated? You can't be.
Yeah.
So everything we do is always aimed at keeping the children connected with the context that even when we have expat children,
Yeah.
they appreciate this, because they're living in a country like India
Yeah.
right now. So unless you're willing to exist in that context and be able to relate to that context, you don't really learn
Absolutely.
about that. So if you lived in another country, you would be learning in that context. If you live in this country, you learn in this context. Otherwise, you asked me that question early on about why did I start Neev Academy. And there was a conversation that my son had with me. He was in grade 2 and he was talking about, can I leave the country? And it's and he was having this two parallel conversation. One is, can I leave the country and get another passport and I can go away
at 2 or grade 2?
at grade 2.
Okay.
Grade 2 at age
But still
8.
7, 8, yeah.
And the other parallel conversation he was happening, private sector versus public sector. Public sector in India is bad, private sector is good. So we were discussing Changi Airport, and we were PR. So
Yeah.
he said Changi Airport must be private, So it's
Because
that,
it's so
I said
good.
no, it's public actually. So he was forming his models of the world, and he was saying that the West or advanced societies or
Developed
richer
part,
societies, developed world is better and India is bad. can I go away from this? Because India is about corruption, India is
Yeah.
about all this bad stuff,
Yeah.
and I can go away from this too. And I was just thinking that where is he going with this?
Yeah.
And that theory of, and that's when it came back, the Vikings, all of that, and that's when we made that switch and we said that, we need to go with this education a bit longer because India is like a textbook.
Yeah.
There is so much to learn this lake.
Yeah.
And what's happening? The lake is on our. It's on our
Backyard, literally.
backyard, really. And you can kinetic particle theory in action.
Yeah.
When eutrophication of the lake
Yeah.
happens, right? So it's KPT in action, chemistry,
Yeah.
nitrates, phosphates, all of that getting released into it, hyacinth and the effect of that, anaerobic. There's so much to
Yeah.
learn from that. Forget about the arts and forget about culture and forget about biodiversity and all of that, right? So I think India is like a living textbook.
Yeah.
Right? And most countries are like a living textbook, but India is a rich living textbook with so much it's hard to bring that into our learning. We just came back from a journey to Madhya Pradesh. The question that we were asking our high school students was, can a poor state, you have poor states, you have rich states, and then you have some middle states.
state.
So Madhya Pradesh is a middle state.
state.
So is it history? Is it choices? Is it circumstances that make
A state where
a
it
rich
is today.
state, right? Bangalore, that would be the Karnataka, that would be
Yeah.
the argument.
Yeah.
So what makes a state a rich state? Can a poor state become a rich state? So that was at the core of it all. And they were
Interesting.
looking at public finance and saying, where does money come from? Where does money go? Now that's big learning for kids,
Yes.
right? So they understood all of that. They understood why as a country we can't, and they came to it themselves to say that why we can't switch away the whole country to tertiary sector.
Yeah.
There are industries in primary and secondary sector because you have to take people with you as you grow as a country. You live in a society, not in an economy. So I think for the kids to have an understanding,
That's true learning.
and I don't want to belittle the big country and rich country that we live in from that, but our goal is for kids to love the context that they belong to and not walk away from that by the elite opt out, saying that this is stinky, this is dirty, this is broken, and I want to get away from it as soon as I can. You don't need to necessarily solve the problems. But you can think about the problems. You can understand why the problems exist. If you understand why the problems exist, then you will know that those problems are solvable at some point of time, and then you don't hate that context. So it's understanding that context, learning from that context is also part of motivation, because kids also start to see stereotypes that exist in our society. There is so much that they learn from that. The typical argument for kids was that they should also start a software sector, but how can you start a software sector in Madhya Pradesh? Because people are not coming there for software. They started understanding after speaking to IAS officers and politicians there that maybe they need to look at more food processing first but also start looking at tertiary sector of tourism and develop better facilities, better amenities and things like that, so that more tourists start coming into a state like
Again,
Madhya
bringing
Pradesh.
context into play for the state.
Exactly, because
Nice.
the context of Madhya Pradesh is different from the context of Karnataka and different from the context of Maharashtra, different from the context of Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. So I think it's...
Building on that, in the context of, Neev being a premium school, how do you remain inclusive? That's part of the full-rounded learning, right? To expose your children from all backgrounds
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
economic strata as well.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge you face?
It is
or
a challenge.
How do you work around it?
It is a challenge. We end up having conversations with parents who struggle sometimes, and they make that choice to prioritize the child's education because good education is not cheap.
Yeah.
Today, you need to pay teachers, you need to pay for resources, you don't want to crowd up your classes too much. We work very hard to keep our costs in control, for sure. So we don't dollarize, we don't go crazy with any of our costs,
Okay.
whether it's manpower or it's resources. We don't build any facilities at Neev that kids are not using.
Got it.
So we won't have large, vast lawns which say, don't walk here.
Yeah.
Anything which is at Neev is something that is getting used by kids. In fact, kids object to spaces which they see are not for
Void
them,
spaces if there
not
are.
for them. Our young children say that, I don't like that space because the teachers go into that space and I don't, so we have to tell them that
Interesting.
sometimes teachers need to have discussions
Yeah.
that are not to be heard by you
Yeah.
or about you for that matter. So I think so that's our goal, that we consciously keep our costs as much in control. But having said that, we are expensive.
Yeah.
Right. So but we put all of that back into the school.
Yeah.
Everything gets put back into the school, and we are constantly questioning costs. A typical cost like learning journeys, if you look at learning journeys, our learning journeys cost half what most other international schools' learning journeys cost.
Wow.
I don't know what they do with all those extra costs, because
Yeah.
I think we have some pretty good learning journeys,
Yeah.
and what can you possibly do at twice the cost
Yeah.
of that? But the reason for that is because that's not in the fee, and parents pay for that separately, and we
Yeah.
don't make money on that either.
Yeah.
So how do you? We are always working hard to, and we cringe, whenever a cost goes up or something, we really
Yeah.
cringe. We negotiate hard with
Yeah.
vendors. People like Redwood and others know that we every time a cost gets quoted, we're going to come back to negotiate it. So I think it's always that we want the best in our children's lives, because we have children who are coming from families that have lived around the world. You want them to see the best. You don't want them to walk away from India. You want them to have a better vision of India and
Yeah.
understanding of India. But at the same time, you don't want to dollarize your costs and go crazy with that, so that kids don't lose track of that. We're very conscious of stationery. We are conscious of, if you go into our preschools, nothing gets thrown. So even paper doesn't get thrown, because
Recycle.
once paper gets used on one side, it gets used on the other side.
Yeah.
Once crayons have come down to that small point, then they get
Sharpened.
shaved and they get ironed onto stuff for new different kinds of art forms. So literally nothing gets, once the paper is used on both the sides, then it gets cut into strips to be used for some other kind of artwork,
Craft, yeah.
or paper mache or things like that. So we are conscious of use of resources. That's part of what we are always doing. But we don't hold back either. So there's always that balance.
Yeah.
That how do you ensure that children are not lacking for what is required to move learning forward? Spend on that, but don't go crazy.
And
Don't throw money.
You've chosen to be self-funded.
Costs we recognize are like fingernails,
Yeah.
If you don't control them, they're just
They
going to keep
keep
growing
growing
longer
up.
and longer, and then becoming
analogy.
unwieldy. So we are very conscious of that at Neev.
Yeah.
Our board is very conscious of that. They're very kind, but they're also very conscious of don't go crazy with costs, because costs are a disease.
Yeah. Oh, well said. You've chosen to be self-funded.
Yeah.
What was the reason for that deliberate choice? And has that somehow constrained you in any ways?
Our children never felt the lack of it. Our children did not have the kind of sports facilities that the children in school, my children didn't have the kind of sports facilities necessarily that
Yeah.
the kids
Students
today
today
at
have,
Neev
yeah.
do. But they never felt the lack of it, because we always ensured that was made up somehow. We were playing in public grounds. We were doing all of that. When we couldn't afford the air-conditioned buses, we had non-air-conditioned buses. When we couldn't afford the ready-to-use air-conditioned buses, we fitted them out and we made them
Okay.
work. So many of those. Today we have really nice, fabulous fleet of buses, and that's very comfortable. So it's all context specific. As we grow as a school, all of this becomes more comfortable. But it's always our goal to ensure that nothing is lacking in our children's lives. We've always had things like debates. We've always been reading. Today we give the novels that become part of the reading, we give it away to children. At that point, early on, we never gave it away.
Yeah.
It remained in our collection, so kids couldn't
Loaned it.
annotate it,
Yeah.
and it was they had to write also notes in pencil and then erase those notes and give them back to us. So things like that. But now we recognize that building that bookshelf for a child is important.
Yeah.
So we'll give it away. But we won't give away things for the heck of it.
Yeah.
We won't just throw money at it.
Yeah.
So we're conscious of that. And yet it's a struggle, for sure. We know that it's a very creamy layer of society that we serve and that comes to us. But it's also the recognition of what we aim to do, right? We want Olympians to come out of Neev. We want Nobel Prize winners to come out of Neev long term. And that's the long-term vision of what this school is built for. Can we be the Harvard of education in India for school, right?
Yeah.
So it's Can we be the school that from which many years later we have discoverers and innovators coming out of it, which doesn't happen today as a school. We don't have a concentration of any school like that in the country. We have many schools like that in the US or in Western society that do that, they have a concentration of that fabulous education that happens. So why do we not have that? I think it's, we serve that creamy layer, but we serve that creamy layer consciously, knowing that they are likely to be in that position of making huge change for India tomorrow. So I think that's where we are. Control the cost as much as you can, but recognize the group that you serve, and then hold them to that hard target.
Yeah,
We're not easy on those kids. You know, if kids are treating that safety net as a hammock, we call them out on it, and we say, you know, that's a safety net. It's not a hammock. Trampoline is what you need to convert that to. So we hold the kids to that sort of, and our parents appreciate that.
Yeah.
Largely, they stand by us in all of those choices.
No, this is amazing. And you know that you mentioned earlier in our conversation about, you know, you've been doing this for 20 years and you envision yourself to do it maybe 10 years and then want to sort of lay the foundation of how this becomes a self-governed institute for the larger legacy to continue.
A self-healing
What
learning
made you
culture
realize that
and
you
a
need to do that?
sustainable governance for sustainability. Those are our goals.
What made you realize you need to do that?
I mean, we're not going to live forever. Today, we all went to schools where we would not send our children.
Yeah.
And that's true for most of us, right? Why?
Yeah.
Why are there not schools in our cities where generations have gone and will continue to go?
Well, there are legacy schools which have that.
Very
few. Few boarding schools. You'll have
One or
the
two.
Mayos in their daily colleges, La Martiniers of the world.
One or two. Right, and I think it's a. So I think it's. I mean, we all went to schools that we won't send our children to for many different reasons.
Fair enough.
How do you ensure there are legacy institutions, and who really owns a school?
Yeah.
Finally, that's a question we always ask, right? It's not us, because it's a trust.
Yeah.
Everything is owned by the trust.
Yes.
It's not my children who are going to own that school for sure. It's not teachers who own that school. It's not even the children who are at it, right?
Yeah.
I think, so we've come to that thought that the people who really own that school are the alumni of a school.
True.
So because they are the ones who keep coming back, and their lives change as a result of the repetition of the school, right? So
Absolutely.
the alumni, we are so who judges whether this is a good school or not, right? That judgment. Jonas Salk asked that question in a time of profound change, that are we being good ancestors?
Yeah.
And that's a very loaded question,
Yeah.
right? Who judges if
Who
you're a
judges?
good ancestor? Descendants.
So many perspectives.
Descendants judge, and descendants are to come much after you, right?
Yeah.
And they will judge whether you were a good ancestor or not. So can we be a school where alumni many generations later turn around and say, hey, that was good.
Yeah.
It was good not just because you educated me and made sure I had a fabulous college to go to and made sure I could read and write well, but also because you held ethics up
Yeah.
hugely to me, and that ethical backbone that the children develop. You know, the other day we had these alumni who came back, and they were these this very creative boy, and he was chatting with me, and suddenly he turned around and he touched my feet before leaving, and it just took me aback, and I just moved back, and because he did it, there were 3 other boys,
They followed.
and 2 of them were made to touch my feet because he's done it now. You know, what made that child do that? You know, and he's in a design school in New York.
Yeah.
So I think, I think it's these little moments that make you think that, okay, we are doing good because we are making such a huge difference in a child's life so many years after that child has left us, that he thinks that humne kuch theek kiya.
Yeah.
That is when so that's why I think alumni are the owners of a school. They will judge whether we were a good school. So we owe it to them to set up a school that's going to carry on for many generations. When our kids say that, this new campus that you're building, we won't get to use it, I always tell them I look forward to giving you the admissions tour when you come back to admit your children.
Children, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so the
I
alumni
will not be
behavior
around.
can be a great indicator of, just not saying this was a great school, but your action will speak loudly than
Yeah.
any other thing.
Yeah, I think it's,
because you will not put your kids to a school which you don't feel confident
and
about.
you may still not bring your child back, because you
the
may be
context
living in
might
another
change,
part
yeah,
of the
yeah,
world,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because of that. But the fact that you'll want to come back and say that, hey, this is a great school when I was there, and this is continuing to be an even better school today for the children, I think that's what I live for.
And I will flip that also, that even alumni need to realize that, contributing and participating back at your school is so important, because you feel like, oh, I've gone through that school, now it doesn't matter. But that's not the right approach, because how the school is doing today is actually enhancing the value of your education.
Your resume.
Your resume, exactly.
So I think it's that ownership that, so that's what we recognize, and that's what we work for. And that's why the need for creating a school, a learning culture that's self-healing and that evolves with time. A learning culture or a governance structure that promotes sustainable growth for the school, and also not hard coding too much, being responsive all the time to what's going on, recognizing the hard structures and soft structures of a school, because hard structures are required for keeping quality and strength, but you also need a lot of soft structures that remain in balance, which allows flexibility to happen. We always say that, don't lose the flexibility of youth until the wisdom of age sets in. So that's your hard structures and soft structures kind of analogy. So keeping that in balance, which a lot of our textbook curriculum kind of structures take away. So I think having even curriculum that evolves and grows all the time is as important. I mean, the fact that we went to Madhya Pradesh and we did that bit of learning there, and there's so much that the kids saw. The kids have an economics unit now in grade 9. So the end task of that unit is an essay on growth of Madhya Pradesh using the economics learning that they have as part of their unit. They'll write an essay on that. So there's flexibility in the curriculum which allows you to do that. In a textbook curriculum, you couldn't do that.
I want to add a little bit of a personal context from you. Of 20 years of doing this, and you've been a parent, you've been a founder, you've been an institution builder. Has there been any belief about childhood or schooling that you have changed over these years? Your thought around those?
I think children are the same everywhere, is what I recognize. It's the opportunity of learning that changes their futures. There is nothing at all. Nothing that I think it's just that recognition that children are the same everywhere. Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, spoke about him and his early political days in the Chicago school system. And he speaks about how he's seeing these young children standing in a line and struggling with some stuff with their sweatshirts and something. And he's in a very low performing school at that time. And he talks about, and he says that, children are the same everywhere. So for us to recognize that children are the same everywhere, when we go to the Tibetan children's village in Dharamshala, children are the same everywhere. When we go to rural Rajasthan, children are the same everywhere. The opportunities that they are given change their futures so hugely. And I see that, what made my father come out of that village, and he changed the lives of not just his siblings as a result of that decision. That I don't know what made him make that decision, but he changed my life. He changed my children's life. He changed my nieces and nephews' lives. He changed their spouses' lives, So I think it's I think the one thing that is a big question in front of me right now is, can we do anything to take change to that larger India somehow? Can it be the literacy practice at Neev that we can take larger? We often discuss this also with our board members. One of our board members is the drafter of the education policy of NEP.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we often discuss this, that how can we take this work of Neev, because even for us, it feels like it's never finished.
Yeah.
But even this work in process, which has such huge benefits to not just learning and skill building, but also motivation of learners. How can we take this wider?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that we have, because I think recognizing that children are not smarter today just because they can cut paste things more, but children are really the same everywhere, is the opportunity that of exercising that ability that changes their future.
Very true, and that's really the need of the hour. And if
Yeah.
if a lot of our
That hurts.
school ecosystem starts to think in that way, that what is that one thing
Yeah.
that they can bring out
Yeah.
to create that larger impact?
And our children recognize that, a lot of our children choose to do service projects for teaching in government schools, teaching in schools for laborers,
Yeah.
things like that. And earlier I used to fight it,
Yeah.
because I used to
Now
say,
you're
what do you
getting
know about
volunteers.
teaching?
Yeah.
And then I realized that on Saturdays teachers are not there. On they sometimes don't have a phonics teacher at all. Reading programs are not there in schools. So the fact that our children do these reading programs, and they do that 40 minutes thrice a week kind of reading program with multiple schools, that just advances kids' learning so hugely that I'm realizing that, okay, it's you're bringing an opportunity in that did not exist otherwise. And and then we get feedback from those schools that those children are not just reading better and understanding better, but they're putting their hands up in class more.
Yeah.
Because their confidence is growing as a result of, and they feel that they can ask more questions now
Yeah.
as a result. So
So that's like learn to teach, sort of, or teach to learn.
we say you read. We always say that you read to learn. You learn to read so that you can read to
Read to
learn.
learn, yeah.
Right. So can we get more children to that place where they can learn to read,
Yeah.
and then they'll break the barrier. You can't change the finish line.
Yeah.
Right, you can't equalize the finish line for everybody,
Yes.
but you can try and make the start line a bit more fair.
Yeah.
And in education, if there's any one skill that is going to make that start line more equal or more fair, it's reading. So how can we take, and that's why we discussed that, how can we take that literacy practice to more people? Our kids are already doing it.
Yeah.
In many schools. They run the service programs, and they're teaching kids online in places like Dharamshala and all kinds of places how to read. It's
Would you
Maybe
resonate
that'll
if
change.
someone was to say Neev the reading school?
no.
No.
No,
Not like
I
that.
would not. I would not resonate, because we're reading.
You're not
is-
just reading. Reading is foundational, but not limiting to that, is what
no,
you said earlier. Yeah.
No. It often gets misunderstood, because, and in fact, parents tell us that, what you're doing for reading, can you also do for science? But
Okay.
we can't. The science and the math and the English and the
requirements are
history.
different in that
No, and
aspect.
it's also happening.
Yeah.
वो तो होगा ही, right? Reading is what doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So making reading happen is the hard thing, and making reading cool is the hard thing. So I think that's why we do this huge thing for reading. We also thought of that, should we have a promise that every child a reader? Should we have that as a promise to all parents? But it doesn't make sense, because reading is just a way of discovering who you are. So I think it's every child a unique individual is what our promise is. If you look at our logo, that's what our logo is. Each one of the 4 dots, which is above the Neev logo, and Neev means foundation
Yeah.
in Sanskrit. And then we have the 4 dots above, because Neev is the foundation, and each one of those dots is unique because it's a fingerprint. So Neev is the foundation, and children rise above.
Wow.
That's what we are about. But each dot is unique. It's not a circle. It's a unique shape.
It has a meaning. Each dot has a meaning.
Each dot is a fingerprint. If you look at them, they're not circles. They are actually a fingerprint. They are,
interesting.
it's 4 fingerprints, and each fingerprint is unique. Every child is unique. So we always say that every child is unique when they come to us. Can we keep them unique as they
Yeah.
grow in that journey? That's our challenge.
So, if every school leader listening to our conversation today, and if they took one action over the next 12 months because of this conversation, what would you want that action to be?
I'd love for people to do, if it is only one thing that school leaders had to do differently, build reading.
Okay.
That would be the one thing. If there were two things that they had to do, create time for uniqueness. I think too many of our schools treat the mean as the goal. It's the standard deviation that should be the goal. It's the variability that should be the goal,
Well said.
not the same.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would wish.
And I would love for you to speak to, there are, 2-3 major stakeholders in our listening community today. And, from as a school leader, which you just spoke about, what would be your thoughts and advice to, teachers listening and parents listening at the same time? Like what you said for the school leaders, what would you say for teachers to focus on and parents to focus on?
A bunch of different advices.
Please.
So, teachers. So content is important, but not enough.
Yeah.
Is what I would say, because teachers often and content is very important, right? But you can't do without it. But it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's when the impact of the learning is what did the child get out of it.
Yeah.
So hang in there and create the time for the reflection. Create the time to see what every child got out of it. Don't just throw content at kids, because a lot of teachers do just in case teaching, just when we say just in time, a lot of teachers do just in case.
Throw a bunch of stuff, something will
Just
stick.
in case is required by the child, right? But the thing is, the kids are very good at tuning that out. So be conscious of what you're bringing into the classroom, what content you're bringing in. Don't bring in too much content. Have skills that are constantly paralleling it and growing. Look for the understandings with the children.
Nice.
That's what I would say to teachers. Parents have a tough job today, because I think we are living in the toughest possible time. Not only are we concerned about that, that we don't know how to parent, but now there's digital lives and AI and all of that, which is telling us and telling our kids all kinds of things. I only feel very grateful that my kids got out before AI happened from the school learning. So I think it's, parents, be brave. Trust your instinct more than anything else. Don't think that parenting is learning that is going to get taught to you by an expert somewhere, but listen to a lot of people that talk about how they parented or how they were parented. And from that, be willing to change the theories you have of on parenting. Be willing to form your own theories by trusting what is gut instinct for you as well. That's
Great.
what I would
Kavita,
say.
thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And thank you for being here today with us. We've had an exceptional conversation, and we didn't realize how long we've been in conversation today. So thank you so much for all the insights.
Thank you so much.
from
It was
us.
a fun conversation.
Yes.
I loved it.
Absolutely. I want to end today by returning to something deeper than conclusion. If you're watching this as a school owner, a leader, a teacher, or even a parent, what you've just heard is not a blueprint. It's a mirror that asks uncomfortable questions. What are we optimizing for when no one is watching? What do we protect when growth tempts us to compromise? And who does our institution ultimately serve across time? Institutions don't fail because founders leave. They fail because founders don't design for their own irrelevance. What stays with me from this conversation is not curriculums or outcomes. It's the idea that education is an act of stewardship, not ownership. The schools are not products we build. They are promises we keep to children we will never meet. If this conversation made you slightly uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you're listening. This is Inspired. Conversations for those who are not just building institution, but shaping the kind of ancestors they want to be. I'm your host, Ankur Gupta. I will see you in my next episode. Till then, keep reading and keep inspiring.